Before the wrathful specter had time to appear, Sunny attacked first. Stepping through the shadows, he passed through the stone wall in front of him and entered a vast ruined hall. It was illuminated by the pale rays of moonlight that fell through the broken roof, but also full of deep darkness. That darkness was cut by the bright radiance emanated by the incandescent blade of the cruel sight. Jumping over a pile of rubble, Sunny brought his spear down on the howling wraith and then spun, sending an unexpected thrust in the direction where any enemy would have retreated. Sadly, the apparition was suddenly somewhere else. Sunny spat a curse. The wraiths moved through space as though they were suspended between two worlds, as well as between the ground and the night sky. Their feet, if they had any, never touched the stone floor, and as such, Sunny couldn't observe their footwork to judge their next move. What's worse, sometimes they simply disappeared and then appeared some distance away, as though phasing between different states of existence. It was a bit like fighting Sunny himself when he used Shadow Step to zip around the battlefield. He muttered under his breath about how annoying it was. Dashing forward, he barely avoided the ghostly claws and rolled over his shoulder on the floor. The steel of the undying chain scraped against the shattered stones, producing a dull sound. Considering how narrow the slits of the featureless mask that served as the visor of his helmet were, Sunny had a surprisingly wide and unobstructed field of view, almost as though he wasn't wearing any at all. Jumping back to his feet, he was finally able to take a good look at the hall he had entered. Sunny said, "Ah, so that's where she was coming from." It was the central chamber of the ruin where, as he suspected, a fierce confrontation had taken place in the ancient past. The stone slabs of the floor were cracked and misshapen, the pattern of destruction suggesting that something had detonated with tremendous force in the center of the hall once. The pillars supporting the roof were long toppled, and the walls themselves had mostly collapsed. In the center of the room lay the remains of something resembling a massive stone chalice, now broken and almost unrecognizable, and there were human bones littering the floor. Some skeletons were scattered entirely, and some were still whole. A few even wore the rotten remains of red silken garments that strongly resembled those of the deadly specters. Sunny had no doubt that these were the remains of people from whose souls the ghastly wraiths had been born. He had no idea how they had died, why their souls had turned into vengeful specters instead of dissipating into the void, and what drove them to madly attack anyone who approached the ruins. All he knew was that the wraiths were very hard to destroy and full of seething hatred toward the living. Or maybe they just really hated him in particular for whatever reason. He grinned, and then brought his armored boot on one of the skulls, crushing it into dust. That caused the damnable specter to let out another chilling shriek and lunge at him with murderous fury, as though she had lost all reason. If the creature had any reason, that is, to begin with, which was precisely what Sunny was hoping for. His body, conditioned by the endless hours of practice with Effie and Saint, reacted almost on its own. Shifting his weight to his right foot, Sunny burst with motion and threw his hand up. The polished shaft of the cruel sight slid between his fingers, suddenly extending forward to its full length. He only caught it near the very end. The reach of this strike was truly incredible, compared to how far a takai like the Midnight Shard could effectively cut. The incandescent blade caught the wraith in the chest, sending tongues of white flame dancing on her spectral figure. Divine flames could burn even souls after all. However, even engulfed in flames, the creature continued its attack. Since it was impossible to recover from performing such a strike quickly, Sunny would have been in trouble. Luckily, the cruel sight was a very special weapon. Its shaft started shortening at the same speed as the wraith was advancing, continuing to burn it without a pause. In the end, Sunny found himself face to face with the hateful apparition, gripping the hilt of a short sword. Without wasting any time, he pulled it upward, slicing through the incorporeal body of the enemy and reaching her neck. White flames suddenly tore through the darkness of the creature's eyes, and before her ghostly claw could reach his flesh, just like that, the wraith was destroyed. As her figure shimmered and started to disappear, Sunny let out a shaky breath, then summoned Saint from the shadows and threw the cruel sight to her. Sunny told her to guard him.
"You have slain a fallen demon, Chalice Maiden."
The taciturn demon calmly caught the sword, weighted it in her hand, and then assumed her usual indifferent pose.
Your shadow grows stronger.
Sunny gritted his teeth and muttered that this was going to suck. The voice of the spell resounded once more, echoing in the darkness of the ruined hall.
Your shadow is overflowing with powers.
He screamed and fell to his knees, feeling as though his very soul was on fire, as though something was rising from its dark depths, ripping it apart.
Your shadow is taking shape.
Damn it all, why does it have to hurt so much?
Sunny groaned and clawed at the floor, tears streaming from his eyes. The fingers of his armored gauntlet left deep grooves in the stone. The pain he was experiencing was not the worst he had ever felt, but really up there. He let out a ragged shout of agony. He slammed his fist down, sending cracks through the slab of ancient stone, then did it again and again, pulverizing it into tiny shards. Eventually, those shards turned into dust, and only then did his agony finally begin receding. The spell whispered into his ear.
Your shadow is complete.
Released from the paralyzing pain, Sunny fell down and sprawled on the floor. Breathing raggedly, he remained motionless for a few minutes, and then summoned the runes. Familiar symbols shimmered in the air. Name Sunless, true name lost from light, rank awakened, class demon, shadow cores 3-7, shadow fragments 0-3000. Sunny smiled weakly. After a while, he muttered that he was back to 0, he guessed. Sunny just survived his shadow taking shape and crawled back to 0 with a weary smile. If someone you know would love this story, share this episode with them. Then settle back in for what comes next. Now that Sunny had experienced moving up a class without simultaneously rising to a new rank, he understood the difference between the two more clearly. Ascending to a new rank was a much more profound change. It elevated the quality of his shadow cores and essence, gifted him with new abilities, and allowed for a deeper access to his aspect. The resulting jump in power was nothing short of tremendous. Reaching a new class, on the contrary, primarily affected the quantity of his shadow essence. And as such, the increase in power was much more gradual. Sunny didn't feel much stronger than he had a few hours ago, but that was because he had already been enjoying the extra strength and essence capacity for a long time. In fact, the main benefit of having several cores had been aiding him ever since Sunny passed the 1000 mark on the counter of shadow fragments, unlike all other awakened, excluding Nephis. There was no limit to his capacity to store essence and reinforce his body. Or rather, that limit was so high that it might have as well not been there. However, that was not to say that Sunny didn't get other, incredibly potent benefits from manifesting a third shadow core. Standing up with a groan, he allowed the moonlight to bathe his slender figure and looked down at the 3 dark silhouettes sprawled on the ancient stones in front of him. One shadow looked like it was suffering from a toothache, the other was beyond itself and jubilant, and the third one, Sunny stared at it in silence. The third shadow was just standing there motionlessly and staring at him, its dark figure not betraying any hint of emotion. Under its silent and unnerving gaze, he suddenly felt a bit uncomfortable. For some reason, Sunny shivered slightly. He ventured to ask whether it was just him, or if this guy was a bit creepy. The creepy shadow didn't react at all to these thoughts and just continued staring at him without moving. Sunny hesitated, then cleared his throat and welcomed the new shadow to the team, telling it to meet the other 2, its elder siblings. The new shadow lingered for a few moments, and then slowly turned its head to look at his other ones. Immediately, the happy shadow made an energetic move to welcome it, but then stumbled mid-step, shivered a little, and slowly backed away, somehow ending up hiding behind the gloomy one. The gloomy shadow sighed with contempt, then faced the new guy and glared at him, clearly unimpressed. Amused, Sunny watched the 2 stare at each for several minutes straight. In the end, the creepy shadow glanced at him, then silently walked over to one of the ancient skeletons and studied the skull with disturbing fascination. It was trying to act cool, but Sunny could tell that the new guy was a bit flustered. He smiled and remarked that that gloomy one was a real menace, and that even he was afraid of it a little. The gloomy shadow looked at both of them with disdain, shook its head, and indifferently turned away. Sunny chuckled and murmured that it was time to experiment a little. After that, he summoned all 3 shadows and wrapped them around his body. Immediately, he felt explosive might course through his veins, his skin turning hard as stone, his speed increasing tremendously. It was as though he grew 4 times more powerful than he had been a couple of seconds ago. A dark grin found its way onto his face. He murmured that that was how it felt to be a demon. Sunny dashed to the wall of the vast chamber, then ran back, raising a gale of wind in his wake. Then he brought his fist down on a piece of rubble, making it explode into a cloud of shards. Finally, he saturated his muscles with essence and jumped up, easily flying a dozen meters into the air and climbing onto the roof of the ruin through the breach in the dome of its central hall. His heart was beating fast in triumphant exhilaration. He exclaimed that it was incredible, that it was amazing. Sitting down, he glanced at Saint, who was far below him now, and laughed. Sunny was more powerful now than any awakened was supposed to be. In fact, in terms of pure physical ability, he was much closer to masters. Perhaps even at the same level as those of them who had just reached their rank and had no time to reinforce their cores yet. That was not to say that he had a good chance of prevailing in a fight against an ascended. Physical ability was not what made them so deadly, after all. Remembering the ease with which Master Jet had severed the arm of a fallen tyrant, Sunny sighed wistfully. What's more, he now had the ability to augment 3 things at the same time. If Saint wasn't with him, Sunny could enhance his body, his armor, and his weapons simultaneously. Depending on the situation, he could also stack augmentations either on the cruel sight or the undying chain, which gave him much more choices during a battle with especially tough or dangerous opponents. And there was one other thing. Sunny summoned the runes and glanced at a particular string. Shadow Soul Serpent, Shadow Rank Dormant, Shadow Class Demon. Sunny said with satisfaction that it was just as he thought. Before, the Soul Serpent was a mere monster. Sunny had long thought that the Shadow's rank depended on the level of Shadow Dance comprehension he was able to achieve, while its class depended on his own. Now he had proof. Looking down, Sunny noticed new runes shimmering in the darkness. Shadow Attributes, Shadow Guide, Soul Weapon. Shadow Abilities, Serpentine Steel. The ability was new. Excited, he read its description.
Serpentine Steel ability description. Shadow Serpent's soul weapon form can assume the shape of any weapon.
A crooked smile appeared on his face, commanding the serpent to slither forth and assume the shape of the dark Odachi. He studied the great sword for a few moments and then gave another command. The lusterless blade suddenly flowed like black mercury, and a few moments later, he was holding a long spear in his hand. Almost unseen on the dark wood, the scales of a long coiling body were engraved on its shaft, the spearhead shaped to resemble that of a serpent. Sunny drew in a deep breath and murmured that this was perfect, that it was just what he needed. Dismissing the predatory spear and allowing the shadow to slither back onto his body, he looked east, where a pale lilac line had already appeared over the horizon, and smiled. He murmured that he should be getting back. The new day was coming, and Sunny couldn't wait to return to the real world. With only a few months left until it was time to challenge the Seed of Nightmare, he had a lot of things to do. A few days later, Sunny was in his living room, watching as Rain performed the same strike over and over again, her eyes full of stubborn determination. The practice sword rose and fell, over and over again, cutting the air with a whistling sound. Actually, her form wasn't bad. Effie was currently traveling between citadels, so she had not come out of her sleeping pod for a while now. Sunny and Rain were alone, which made the training session much less lively. Sunny murmured that finally there was some peace and quiet. Despite thinking that, Sunny couldn't help but feel that his home seemed a little bit empty these days. He sighed. There were other things on his mind, too. Now that his part of the deal with Cassie was complete, the journey into the nightmare was drawing close. No matter how aloof about the whole thing Sunny wanted to remain, he was aware that there was a real possibility that he would not return from that trial alive, even if he did. There was no telling how long conquering the nightmare would take, which meant that his remaining time with Rain was limited, and he couldn't waste it. He had to accelerate her training and teach her some actual battle skills. Observing the teenage girl, who continued to swing her practice sword while drops of sweat rolled down her face, Sunny was in deep thought. What style was he going to teach her? Rain was his sister, so his first instinct was to share his legacy, shadow dance with her, almost as though they were members of an actual clan. However, that wasn't a very good idea. Not only was her mentality poorly suited for his shapeless and insidious battle art, but she was also physically incapable of learning it. Since everyone received extensive combat training in school, there weren't really a lot of weak people in the waking world. But shadow dance was simply not meant to be practiced by mundane humans. It demanded a physical constitution of an awakened at least. Sunny was only able to master the first step as a sleeper because of his unique aspect. Hundreds upon hundreds of shadow fragments he had absorbed on the Forgotten Shore, and the fact that this style was tailor-made for him by him. What then? The flowing and unpredictable battle art that Nephis had taught him obviously came to mind. It was designed to be a perfect foundational style, after all. However, Sunny didn't like the idea of teaching it to Rain, not only because he felt that he didn't have the right, but also because it came from the immortal Flame clan. Sunny suspected that this ingeniously adaptable battle art had been created by the martial genius, Broken Sword himself. He also had an idea of who Broken Sword's killers were. Who could tell what problems knowing this style could drag along? By now, Sunny had also learned a plethora of various battle styles in the Dreamscape. However, none of them impressed him too much. That meant that there was only one choice left. Coincidentally, he felt that it was the most fitting, Saint's solid, grounded battle style. It seemed to suit Rain's quiet, thoughtful, and meticulous personality very well. It was also the most precise and methodical technique Sunny knew, and one that provided the best defense. His goal was to ensure that Rain survives for as long as possible, and having a flawless defense went a long way if one wanted to not die. More than that, his sister seemed to share a connection with Saint. If she was such a big fan of the graceful demon, perhaps there was a reason for that. In any case, learning the style of her idol would not be the worst thing in the world. Noticing that he was staring at her with a dark expression, Rain stopped and gave Sunny a questioning look. She asked if she had messed up. He slowly shook his head. Sunny told her that actually her form had been perfect for the last 100 strikes. A wide, incredibly bright smile suddenly appeared on the teenage girl's usually calm and collected face. Rain exclaimed that she had practiced every day while he was gone on his trip, that all her classmates thought she had lost her mind, and asked what those fools even knew. The corner of Sunny's mouth twitched. He wondered inwardly since when she referred to people as fools, and thought that she was such a polite girl before. Before meeting him, Rain asked if she was doing it right, why he had been staring at her with that curses and damnation expression of his.
So what now? I don't have a...
Sunny cleared his throat and said that he thought she was ready to learn more than one strike. Rain beamed and cheered that finally she was ready. She looked around the living room and then asked whether he was going to show her some real battle techniques. She said that Effie had told her he was decent with the sword, at least she thought that was what Effie meant, and asked if he was. Sunny hesitated, then shrugged and stood up. He replied that yeah, he did know his way around a sword and told her to follow him. Since the place was too cramped, turning around, he went toward the hallway and pressed on a certain wall panel, which then moved aside, revealing the doors of an elevator. Rain stared at all that with a funny expression and asked if he had a secret door in his house. Sunny smiled and said that sure he did. Actually, he had two, one for the stairs and one for the elevator. The girl thought for a second, and then gave him an understanding nod. Rain said that he had an underground shelter, and that it was smart, since they didn't have one in their home because building it was very expensive. He gave her a strange look and asked whether her parents weren't rich. Rain laughed and said that for a wildly successful young entrepreneur, he didn't know a lot about money. She conceded that sure, their family was not poor, but there was rich and then there was rich, and they were not that kind of rich. Sunny tilted his head, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. He demanded to know what that nonsense was, and whether rich wasn't just rich. He frowned and retorted that he knew lots about money, that he knew how to make it and how to spend it, and asked what else there was to know. Rain stared at him for a few moments and then silently shook her head. Together, they entered the elevator and descended into the underground dojo. The dojo was rather large and submerged in absolute darkness. Sunny gave the home a command, and immediately, bright light chased the darkness away, revealing the floor, walls, and ceiling that were covered by heavy plates of armored ceramic alloy. Some of the plates already had cracks in them, which Sunny was painfully aware of. After all, those cracks had appeared as the result of Saint repeatedly slamming him against the floor. Simply looking at them made Sunny ache all over. He muttered that he was going to have to replace a few soon. He exited the elevator and walked over to a stand where various practice weapons were kept. These weapons were made out of reinforced synthetic materials to withstand the intensity of awakened training and had cost him a fortune. Sadly, Sunny had never even touched them, since training with the real deal was far more effective. He gave a thoughtful hum. Behind him, Rain walked into the dojo and looked around with curiosity. This space looked dark and mysterious, like a lair of a mythical monster. She asked whether he came here a lot. Sunny gave her a short look and replied that of course he did, that this was where he slept. She was slightly surprised, but then seemed to understand the meaning of his answer. For mundane humans, such a shelter would only be useful if a gate opened nearby, but awakened were more or less defenseless while in the dream realm. They needed the protection an underground bunker could provide much more, since their empty bodies could be easily destroyed when the spirit wandered away. Her gaze traveled to the steel sarcophagus of the sleeping pod, and then moved past it. Suddenly, Rain's eyes brightened and she exclaimed. Asking if that was a Dreamscape pod, Sunny hesitated, surprised by her strong reaction, and ventured that sure it was, and asked why. He wondered inwardly why she was so fascinated by that silly thing when his super expensive sleeping pod was much more impressive. The teenage girl walked over to the alcove with the two machines and studied one of them with excited curiosity. The luxurious, state-of-the-art sarcophagus received zero attention. She asked whether he played often. He rolled his eyes, then shrugged and replied that from time to time, he guessed, when he had time. He added that dueling other awakened helped with his own training. Rain sighed with envy and said that it was cool that some of her classmates had personal Dreamscape pods too. She said they played the version for mundane humans, of course, but that it still sounded amazing. Sunny smiled and asked whether she wanted to play. Rain looked at the pod for a few moments, then slowly shook her head. When she spoke, her voice sounded too mature for her age. She replied that no, not really, it was only fun with friends. He frowned a little, then asked in a neutral tone whether she didn't have any friends. The teenage girl sighed, then turned away from the capsule. She answered that no, she used to have a lot in her previous school, but after her dad got her a spot in this one, she just studied and went home. She said that people there were not very friendly. Sunny thought to himself that that was one way to put it. He looked at her, then smiled widely and declared that friends were overrated anyway, that he never had any growing up, and asked her to look at him and whether he had not turned out just fine. She did look at him, doubt clearly written on her face. She conceded that yeah, maybe, but... Sunny raised an eyebrow and asked, but what? Rain lingered for a few moments, then asked curiously whether he didn't have a girlfriend. Sunny blinked and stammered a confused sound. Sunny thought in disbelief, asking what girlfriend, and telling her not to tell him that she thought he and Effie were. Rain giggled and said that actually she did think that at the start, so she asked Effie, and Effie had told her that he already had a girlfriend. Sunny's eye twitched. He snapped that damn Effie, that he was really going to kill her, or better yet, make Saint kill her. He demanded to know how many times she would repeat that stupid joke about them before realizing that it wasn't funny, that it wasn't funny the first time and it certainly wasn't funny the 100th. He opened his mouth to retort angrily. However, Rain's next words made him fall silent. She said that Effie had told her he brought her flowers every week and even visited her mom from time to time and that she thought it was very sweet. Sunny froze, staring at the teenage girl with a heavy expression. Feeling that his reaction was a bit strange, Rain frowned and asked whether she had said something wrong. He lingered for a few moments, then turned away. Sunny said that no. Effie just liked to run her mouth sometimes, and that she shouldn't have told her that. Not quite understanding what was happening, but feeling dark undertones in his voice, the teenage girl awkwardly smiled and asked whether she had just gotten Effie in trouble. Staring at the practice weapons, Sunny sighed and said that no, it was just that there was indeed a girl he brought flowers to when he could, but she wasn't his girlfriend. Rain glanced at him in confusion and asked why he brought her flowers then. Sunny turned around and looked at her darkly. Rain suddenly shivered, realizing that she had never seen Sunny acting this. Cold. A few moments later, he said evenly that it was because he made it out of the dream realm and she did not. He asked if she understood. The teenage girl thought for a few moments, then paled a little and nodded. Sunny shook his head and said that he didn't think she did and hopefully she never would. With that, he took a round shield and a straight practice sword off the wall, closed his eye for a moment, and then forced an easygoing smile to appear on his face. He said that anyway here was what she would be training with from now on, that they might be a bit heavy for her, but the weight would help her condition her body, and asked what she thought. Still feeling a bit awkward, Rain took the weapons, weighed them in her hands, and cleared her throat. She said that actually she preferred ranged weapons. That was what she had been mostly using in school. Sunny shook his head and said that ranged weapons were wonderful, and that she should definitely know how to use them, but that they stopped being wonderful as soon as a nightmare creature got close to her, and believe him, they would. He said she should learn melee combat first. Rain looked at him with a bit of stubbornness and argued that Knight from Nightingale was an archer, and he was a hero who had a true name. Sunny thought in exasperation that, oh, gods, don't tell him his little sister was Kai's fangirl too, and damned Kai, just he wait. Sunny stared at the teenage girl for a few moments, his expression unreadable. After a while, he said in a strange tone that Knight from Nightingale could fly and asked whether she could. He said that in any case, she should learn how to use a sword first, and if she did, he would get him to personally teach her how to shoot a bow. He asked how about that. Rain laughed and said yeah, sure, and asked why he didn't invite him for dinner as well while he was at it. After that, she covered her mouth with a palm and laughed even louder. Sunny sighed heavily, then shook his head. He thought to himself that this child was hopeless, wasn't she? He waited until Rain stopped laughing and then said sternly that before they started, though, he was going to ask her a question. She looked at him, turning back into her serious, studious self, and asked, yeah, what? Sunny lingered for a few moments, and then asked what she thought the essence of combat was. Rain looked at him with a serious expression, thinking. Inwardly, Sunny sighed. He still didn't know how to change her mentality and make her vicious enough to survive the dream realm. He didn't even know if he wanted to and if that was the right thing to do. At least she seemed to understand a little bit more about the truth of the world after surviving the gate opening. For now, that was going to have to be enough. And this conversation was his attempt to make the lesson stick. After a while, Rain said with uncertainty that she ventured to guess it was survival. Sunny raised an eyebrow, looking at her with surprise. What were the chances that, despite their different life experiences, his sister would answer the question the same way he had, all that time ago in the desolate hell of the Forgotten Shore? He remained silent for a while, remembering those terrible, wonderful days. Then he shook his head. He said that no, the essence of combat was murder. Rain shivered slightly and stammered the word murder back at him in disbelief. Sunny nodded and said that of course, what else would it be? He said that you had to kill your enemy or die, that either way someone ended up murdered and someone ended up as the murderer. So he said, purpose of combat training was to make sure that you were the murderer. He said it was really that simple. He paused and then added that survival was important, of course, but that couldn't be your primary goal. He said such a goal was a terrible one to have, that even in life it was not enough. He said you had to survive to continue living, but if you only lived to survive, then what was even the point? He said that more than that, if you didn't strive for something bigger, something better, then you would only ever do what was required and nothing else, which would make you weaker than those who wanted and dared to do more, and that weakness would cost you your life. His voice trailed off, and Sunny suddenly fell silent. Rain looked at him in confusion and asked if he was all right. He blinked a couple of times and said, yeah, sorry, and then, so. Sunny thought to himself that, well, what do you know, he guessed it was true what they said, that the best way to learn was to teach. While trying to impart some wisdom, little as he had, on his attentive student, Sunny had accidentally stumbled on a truth about his own desperate desire to grow stronger. Everything Sunny had told Rain could be applied to himself. He had long ago abandoned his singular desire to survive at all cost, and now wanted much more. But was his desire to live free and with dignity really comparable to Neff's passionate, immolating obsession? Would he really be able to surpass her while being driven by such a mundane goal? That gave Sunny a lot to think about. He glanced at Rain, and then continued that mastery of combat could be divided into two aspects: mastery of the body and mastery of the mind. He said that the body could be trained through exercise, but the mind was much more tricky. He said that if she could understand the true essence of combat, however, truly grasp it with her very core, then she would have enough clarity to master the mind. Sunny spent some time explaining the fundamental laws of combat, at least to the extent that he himself understood them, to Rain. In the end, he wasn't sure that she really grasped the knowledge he wanted to share with her, but it was at least a start. Thinking back to his own tumultuous education, Sunny couldn't really blame her. It was hard, or maybe even impossible, to really understand battle without experiencing it. He had met Nephis after surviving the first nightmare and several days of fighting for his life on the Forgotten Shore. Even then, it had taken being nearly killed by a carapace centurion for him to reach the state of clarity. There were no carapace centurions around, and Sunny certainly wasn't going to run her through with a sword. So, for now, this was going to have to do. After the verbal lesson, Sunny showed Rain a few basic stances and katas of Saint's style, and watched her struggle to replicate them. The progress was slow, but she was really a talented kid. For now, what held her back the most was her weak body, but that was okay. One couldn't expect a teenage girl to be as strong as an awakened. Her body could be trained. Of course, Rain was never going to be as strong and resilient as a burly, able-bodied man. But then neither was Sunny, due to his low stature and lean build. He couldn't compete with people like Castor or Master Roan in terms of physical might. However, this could be mitigated by aspect abilities, absorbing fragments and mastering precise essence control. What's more, sharp weapons were the great equalizer. The purpose of a weapon was to reduce the amount of force one needed to apply to deliver a lethal blow. Unless one planned to beat their enemy to death with their fists, technique and skill were much more important than pure strength. Saint's battle style could make that inherent disadvantage even slimmer. After a while, Sunny judged that Rain had enough. The girl seemed to be sufficiently exhausted, and pushing further would not do her any good. He gestured for her to stop and place the practice weapons back on the stand, then summoned the endless spring and offered it to the tired girl. Rain was breathing heavily, her pale face glistening with sweat. Noticing the beautiful glass bottle, she smiled with excitement and exclaimed, asking if that was a memory. Sunny tilted his head a little and asked sure, but why was she asking? The girl grabbed the endless spring and studied it from all sides, then cautiously took a few sips. She said that he didn't get it, that she had never seen a real memory up close before, and that it felt so real. He stared at her in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about, that it was real. Rain glanced at him with scorn, drank the water greedily, and then handed the endless spring back with a bit of reluctance. She asked whether he had gotten it after defeating some terrible monster or bought it. Sunny frowned, hesitated for a moment, and then said darkly that it was a gift actually. She blinked a couple of times and asked, "Oh, from that friend of his?" He grimaced and said that no, not from a friend. Then, Sunny dismissed the endless spring and headed toward the elevator. He said that anyway it was time for her to go. Otherwise her parents might think that he had kidnapped her. He trailed off with an "oh." He thought for a bit before offering that he had some ice cream in the fridge and they could eat it before she went, if she wanted, unless Effie had already devoured everything, of course. Rain giggled, then followed him with a very pleased expression. Before entering the elevator, she threw one last glance at the Dreamscape pod, and then suddenly asked whether he was participating in the dream tournament that was in a few days. Sunny scoffed and pressed the button, sending the elevator up. He retorted, asking whether he looked like he had time to play with kids in a playground, and said that he had real things to do. Rain glanced at him and sighed. She said that, yeah, she got it. And what a pity, though. She said she heard that the main prize this year was especially amazing, and that of course he wouldn't be able to win it. But there were many smaller rewards. Sunny's expression subtly changed. As the doors opened, he looked at Rain, remained silent for a moment, and then asked in a very, very disinterested voice, "Oh, really? There were prizes, how curious, and what kind of prizes were they talking about exactly?" Some time later, Sunny saw Rain out, watched as she walked away, and then calmly closed the door. As soon as she did, however, his placid expression evaporated. He exclaimed, demanding to know what the hell and how come he didn't know about this. Hastily taking out his communicator, he accessed the network and searched for information about the dream tournament. A few minutes later, he sat down on a chair a little stunned. He demanded to know what this insanity was. Sunny knew, of course, that Dreamscape duels were a popular form of entertainment, both among the awakened who participated in them, and among the mundane humans who followed their favorite duelists and created boisterous fan clubs. However, he had no idea that even the great clans paid attention to the illusory game. Apparently, the creator of the Dreamscape held a big tournament each year, and each year one of the great clans, either Valor, Song, or Night, sponsored the prize pool. Participants who managed to achieve good results were able to receive cash prizes, memories, and even echoes. The rewards for the finalists were especially generous and came directly from the great clan's armory. They were also of the ascended rank. Sunny trembled, his eyes burning with avarice. He muttered to himself to think about it rationally. The great clans were obviously after a straightforward goal to keep an eye on the rising talents among the unaffiliated awakened. But did it matter? Sunny had already failed to keep his fake persona under the radar. Anyone who paid attention to Dreamscape had at least heard about Mongrel. What was there to even think about? He exclaimed that free goodies, that was what it was. Completely forgetting about his previous disdain for the tournament, Sunny got completely absorbed by the prospect of receiving memories free of charge. He was almost drooling. And if free memories weren't enough, there was another reason for why this tournament now seemed very alluring to him. For the past months, Sunny had participated in hundreds of duels in various arenas. His goal was to absorb as many styles as possible, to reinforce the foundation of shadow dance and make it more efficient. This way, he hoped to achieve the next level of mastery over his elusive battle art. Not all battle styles were made the same. Some were simple and straightforward, while others were complex and unique. The more unique a style was, the harder it was for Sunny to gain insight into its principles. It was not like he had a magical ability to peer into the very essence of a style. This ability of his was more or less mundane, based on his own talent, mastery, and sensitivity to shadows. So, he had been working diligently to create a sizable library of simpler styles, which would in turn improve his capacity to discern the patterns of more complicated ones with sufficient speed. After all styles were constructed out of the same basic elements. The more basic patterns he knew, the easier it was to understand various styles on the fly. However, the quality of his opponents in the Dreamscape arenas was not that high, for obvious reasons. True talents had better things to do than play games. Most of them also belonged to legacy clans, who lived by a different set of rules. In the world of legacies, strength and talent were not something to boast about. Renown only served to make the enemy aware of your weaknesses. In that regard, hidden tigers of the legacy clans were very much like Sunny, remaining in the shadows until it was time to deliver a lethal strike. That was why his progress had stalled lately. These days, the only worthy opponents he could find were a few rare eccentrics and a rare gem here and there, not nearly enough to satiate Mongrel's hunger for a variety of distinct battle styles. What's more, at the highest levels of awakened battle skill styles were not only about physical movements and mindset anymore. They wove unique patterns of essence control into the technique too, which Sunny couldn't perceive and was only able to infer from indirect clues. Sadly, he wasn't exposed to a lot of opponents practicing such styles in the arenas. The tournament was going to change that, however, with the valuable prizes added into the mix. People who would usually not waste time in the dreamscape were bound to show up, lured by the scent of rare memories and echoes. Even people from lesser legacy clans would, without a doubt, be tempted to participate. A powerful ascended weapon or armor could change their lives too. So, Sunny could kill two birds with one stone, compete for these prizes and enrich his library of styles at the same time. He declared to forget it, that he would be a fool to miss this chance. Even knowing what a headache it would be to bring even more exposure to Mongrel, Sunny couldn't let such an opportunity go. Plus, he had some free time while Effie and Kai were traveling to the Chained Isles. Scrolling through the feed, he started reading everything he could find about the upcoming tournament. Several days later, Sunny locked the door of his house, descended into the basement, and approached the Dreamscape pod. As soon as he entered the fake black void, the familiar pleasant voice greeted him.
Welcome back to the Dreamscape, Challenger Mongrel.
Sunny didn't pay attention to it and briefly looked at his status. Mongrel, victories 813, defeats 0. With a quiet sneer, he turned to several images floating in the boundless darkness in front of him. These were the arenas he had access to, and by now, there were significantly more of them than had been there at the start. Today, however, the list looked different. The images of the arenas were pushed to the sides, and a new one appeared in the very middle. It was completely white, with a golden shape of an olive wreath depicted beneath two shining words, Dream Tournament. Sunny lingered for a moment, summoned the mantle of the underworld and Weaver's mask, and then stepped toward the image. The golden wreath disappeared, and Sunny found himself facing two new images. On one, a knight in a suit of polished armor was depicted holding a bloodied sword. On the other, a warrior in an archaic armor was shown standing back to back with the knight, a slender huntress drawing her bow behind them. The pleasant voice announced,
Challenger, select your dream.
Several words appeared above the images, dream of glory and dream of camaraderie. Sunny muttered, asking what was with the bells and whistles. Sunny rolled his eyes. The choice was very simple. One image was going to send him into the individual competition, while the other was meant for cohorts. The Dream Tournament was basically two separate tournaments happening at the same time. This way, those awakened who didn't have combat aspects could also participate and earn rewards. It was a good system. Sunny had no intention of searching for a cohort, so he simply chose the image of the lonely knight and closed his eyes. Unlike the usual Dreamscape duels, the tournament included various battle modes. They were also broadcasted and happened at a schedule, so he had to wait for the first qualifier round to start. Standing in the darkness, Sunny couldn't help but feel a little excited.
Challenger, draw your weapon and prepare. Only the best will survive.
A bright light suddenly shone from above, and he found himself in the middle of a lush forest. All around him, ancient trees swayed lightly, their leaves rustling in the gentle wind. Some distance away, a tranquil lake glistened in the sunlight, and from its clear waters, a breathtakingly beautiful castle rose into the sky. The castle was built out of gray stone and was as large as a city, its ancient walls scarred by 1,000 sieges that it had withstood. Still, those scars could not diminish the ethereal beauty of the great fortress. The arena was vast and encompassed all of the forest. There was no other awakened near Sunny, and for a good reason. The qualifying rounds of the Dream Tournament were held in the form of a grand battle royale. 1,000 challengers were sent into a large environment, and only the last one standing would be allowed to move on. Depending on their performance, a few more people could also gain entry into the tournament. But the only concrete method to qualify was to be the sole survivor. This was a necessary measure implemented in the last few years because of the sheer amount of participants. Arranging and broadcasting so many individual duels was not very practical or profitable, especially considering that most of these awakened were not very skilled. The Battle Royale was meant to weed out the weak and create an exciting show for the viewers. Sunny knew this, of course, because he had done some research in the past couple of days. He didn't need the research to recognize where he was, though. He murmured that, wow, it was even more beautiful in real life. Who didn't know Bastion? This year, Clan Valor sponsored the tournament, so the arena was designed to resemble the seat of their power, Great Bastion, one of the 3 most populous human citadels in the Dream Realm. Sunny had never been to the ancient castle, but its image was ubiquitous in popular culture. He recognized it instantly. He mused that this must be the Lake of Bones then, and all around him was the ancient, cursed forest that Anvil of Valor had destroyed. These days, of course. The landscape surrounding Bastion was very different. Instead of a lush forest, it was surrounded by a sea of ash and charred remains of the dreaded Titan, with human forts built here and there to repel powerful nightmare creatures from wandering close to the citadel. But thanks to the Dreamscape, Sunny got to enjoy the way this place had looked before, vibrant and pristine. The only difference was that there was no harrowing darkness hiding behind the veil of false tranquility. He murmured that, how nice. Compared to the chained aisles, it was a nice change of pace. Just as he thought that, the voice of the Dreamscape suddenly announced,
Challenger Mongrel 19 was eliminated.
Sunny tilted his head and remarked that, well, that was fast, and also, what was up with that alias? Shaking his head, he commanded the Soul Serpent to assume the form of the Odachi and calmly headed deeper into the forest. It was time to start hunting. On the official broadcast channel, the image of an eliminated player was shown briefly. Then, a rather light-hearted voice spoke.
What a kill, just a few seconds after the start, and we already have a casualty. Let's all wish Mongrel 19 better luck next year.
An avatar of an exquisitely handsome young man appeared in the corner of the broadcast. Glancing at the camera with a bright smile, he continued.
And so, the 5th annual Dream Tournament has begun. Yes, it's me, Sickless, your favorite commentator and nightmare creature expert. Hold the applause, he. Guys, I have a big surprise for you. Guess who decided to join me in the commentator booth today?
The young man paused, and then gestured to the other side of the screen, where an older man with sharp features, deep eyes, and a short beard appeared.
That's right, you're not hallucinating. It's Dimmy, the great lore master and former Dream Champion. Give him a warm welcome.
As a deluge of messages flooded the chat, the older man smiled. Dimmy greeted everyone with a hey. Sickless, meanwhile, spoke again.
We have a couple of minutes before the real action starts, since challengers need some time to find each other in this beautiful arena. So, while we wait, I have a couple of questions for Dimmy.
He glanced at the broadcast, which switched between various awakened traveling through the forest. Some of them were well-equipped and looked skilled, while others less so.
First of all, this year we had a record number of fighters signing up for the tournament. What are your thoughts on that as a veteran Dreamscape duelist, Dimmy?
The older man smiled. Dimmy said that it was nice to see more awakened taking up the illusory sword, and that some of them might even know how to use one. He said that, of course, he had to give a lot of credit to the generosity of the great Clan Valor, that they had really outdone themselves with the prizes this year. He added that no, he was not salty, not at all. Sickless laughed, and then threw a mischievous glance at his colleague.
All right, then I'll ask you the question that I am sure is on everyone's mind. As an expert, who do you think will win the tournament, and why is it Mongrel?
As soon as the commentator mentioned Mongrel, the feed changed to the image of a menacing figure in black armor calmly walking through the forest, the blade of the infamous Odachi resting on its shoulder. The lightless pits of the demonic mask's eyes stared directly into the camera as though there was nothing but darkness beneath it. As soon as Mongrel appeared on the screens, the chat exploded. One crowd member cheered that it was Mongrel, and another hailed the Lord. A confused voice asked who Mongrel was, and a second corrected with a laugh whether they meant hailing the lady. Dimmy laughed and said that, yes, this guy. He said that Mongrel was a really impressive fighter, but that the results may not be as predictable as everyone thought. He said that every year the same thing happened, that at the later stages of the tournament, two distinct groups clashed, one being the Dreamscape elites and the other being newcomers attracted by the rewards. He said that historically, the newcomers tended to do better. He sighed and shook his head. Dimmy added that plus, they didn't really know a lot about Mongrel. He said sure, he had a very impressive track record, but most of his wins were achieved against random opponents. He asked who knows what would happen when he faced the best of the best, and said that if he were to bet, his money was still on Queen Bee, and that if anyone had a chance against the newcomers, it should be her. Cyclus nodded a few times, expressing his enthusiastic agreement.
Sure, but still, returning to Mongrel, everyone is dying to know who he really is under that scary mask. And if anyone knows anything about you, Dimmy, they'll know that you must have your guesses.
The older man smiled, his eyes suddenly gleaming with excitement. Dimmy said that it was funny he should ask, and that actually he did have a theory.
Challenger Lord Corvus was eliminated. Challenger Fry was eliminated. Challenger Irax was eliminated.
Sonny stared at the 3 corpses at his feet, which were already turning into a flood of white sparks. These 3 awakened attacked him as a group, and while their skill was not bad and even admirable, he had no problem dispatching the trio in the span of a minute. The fact that they had managed to remain alive for more than several seconds was already an excellent result, considering who their enemy was. Flourishing the Odachi in the air, Sonny shook the drops of blood off its blade and continued walking. Technically, he didn't have to clean his blade, since the blood was bound to turn into sparks of light and disappear too, but that was already a habit of his, not to mention being extremely cool. Truth be told, that short skirmish was not as easy as he had made it look. The awakened were dangerous enemies, since each of them possessed a unique aspect. They were cunning, resourceful, and unpredictable. That was why he had to act swiftly, making the fight appear much more brutal than it should have. Currently, Sonny wasn't using any of his shadows to augment himself. He had decided against it a long time ago, since being able to crush his opponents with brute force was detrimental to his main goal, polishing his battle technique and learning various styles. So, the gloomy shadow was currently behaving like any normal shadow would, while the other 2 were wrapped around the autumn leaf, the memory he used to change the color of his hair. Since it had no other purpose, the augmentation did not give him any advantage. His hair must have looked gorgeous, though. Snickering under the mask, Sonny jogged forward. He was in a rush to eliminate as many other players as he could before the first leaderboard announcement was made. Meeting the group of 3 allied awakened reminded him of the inherent problem with the Battle Royale format of the qualifying rounds, that as soon as true powerhouses revealed themselves, weaker participants were bound to band together and start hunting them down. Very soon, there could be a dozen fighters launching a coordinated attack on him, or even more. Sonny was confident of his skill, but not to that degree. Even for a battle-hardened veteran like him, someone who had spent hundreds of days fighting for his life in the darkest depths of the Dream Realm, such a fight would not be easy. He muttered that this battle royale was going to be much more intense than he had expected. Before Sonny could finish this thought, an ancient tree next to him suddenly exploded into a cloud of splinters, and something sharp shot at him with incredible speed. Cursing, he dashed to the side and barely dodged out of the way. The next moment, a giant arrow whistled past him and embedded itself into the trunk of another tree, its trembling shaft as long as he was tall. Sonny rolled over his shoulder and glanced at the arrow, then lunged into a sprint, spitting a curse about the sniper. A second later, another giant arrow fell from the sky, almost skewering him to the ground. Sonny gritted his teeth and continued running. On the countless screens, an image of a broad-shouldered young man was shown drawing the string of an oversized bow. His mighty muscles strained, and when he released the string, a thunderous sound rolled down the slopes of a tall hill the archer was standing on. Meanwhile, the 2 commentators were not paying him attention. Dimmy said that he could say without a shadow of a doubt that Mongrel was not, in fact, one of the Forgotten Shore survivors, but actually the son of the secret child of the legendary Nightwalker, the founder of the House of Night, and that, well, this was his theory anyway. Cyclus glanced at Dimmy with a wide smile, and then turned the conversation back to the skirmishes in the ancient forest, which were starting to happen more frequently and grow in intensity.
Is that so? Well, that secret grandchild seems to be in big trouble. despite Mongrel's savage victory over the 3 other challengers. Now he seems to be in the crosshairs of one of the newcomers you spoke about earlier. Let's take a look.
The feed changed to the image of Mongrel running swiftly through the woods, dodging one giant arrow after another. His movements seemed steady and precise, as though he had a second pair of eyes at the back of his head. Sickles glanced at the indifferent black mask and involuntarily shivered.
Wow, look at that. What a commendable feat to maintain calm and composure in such a tricky situation. It is almost as if Mongrel is not afraid of anything, not even being bombarded by a rain of enchanted arrows, each of them powerful enough to pierce a fallen monster through. Truly, that man has nerves of steel. I wonder what he is thinking about right now.
What the hell? How is this fair? Crap, this is bad, this is so bad. I don't want to die so soon. What the spell am I even supposed to do?
Panicking and sweating under the mask, Sonny dodged one arrow after another and cursed non-stop. He had no idea who was shooting him, how they were able to aim through the thick canopy of the ancient trees and where they were. All he could do was run, dodge, and pray to the dead gods that he survived this devastating barrage. Luckily, a few moments later, he noticed a rock outcropping not too far away with a deep ravine hiding behind it. Dashing forward, he evaded another giant arrow and slid down the slope of the ravine. Reaching its bottom, he waded through the thick carpet of fallen leaves and pressed his back against the rocks, finally safe from the relentless sniper. Only then could Sonny finally catch his breath and look around. However, as soon as he did, a dark grimace appeared on his face. He cursed inwardly with a damnation. As fate would have it, he was not alone in the ravine, growling in frustration. Sonny gripped the hilt of the Odachi and once again dodged. A few moments later, the pleasant voice resounded over the ancient forest.
A challenger Ajik was eliminated.
Chapter 534, Demonic Swordsman. Sonny remained in the ravine for a few minutes, considering his options and hoping that the unknown archer would have to shift to another target. He had already revealed his ability to teleport during the gate battle, but the quality of the recording hid the details of how he was able to do it. With the crystal-clear picture of the Dream Tournament broadcast, though, Sonny couldn't risk using Shadow Step again, even if he really wanted to. Neither could he send his shadow to scout the position of the archer, which left him in a bind. The best option would have been to stay hidden for a while, but luck was really not on his side today. Shortly after he had defeated the other awakened taking shelter in the ravine, the sound of the rustling leaves subtly changed, and an ominous darkness suddenly moved between the roots of the ancient trees. As more and more people were eliminated, the remaining challengers were bound to start having trouble finding new opponents in the vast arena. So, the arena was designed to grow smaller as time went by. This year, it seemed, the players would be forced to move toward the center by the fact that the beautiful forest was slowly turning back to its true nature, that of a giant, abominable, flesh-devouring titan.
Great, this is just goddamn great.
Pushing off of the rocks, Sonny cursed and started climbing up the slope. Some time later, full of annoyance and with sparks of light falling off his armor, he walked out of the cover of trees and entered a small clearing. There, an awakened and illustrious brass armor stood above the disintegrating corpses of 2 others, holding a heavy war hammer in his hands. A few steps away from him, another was bandaging a shallow cut on her forearm. The man threw one glance at Sonny and rolled his eyes. The man started to say that this was just another mongrel impersonator. But before he could finish speaking, the blade of the Odachi pierced his throat, sliding precisely between the lip of the brass breastplate and the bottom edge of the helmet. As the body of the awakened hit the ground, his partner looked at Sonny with wide eyes. A battle axe fell from her hands. The girl let out a panicked curse, stammering that he was actually the real mongrel, and turned around to run, but before she could, Sonny was already upon her, ending her participation in the battle royale with one swift strike.
Challenger Abel was eliminated. Challenger Win was eliminated.
Sunny sighed and remained motionless for a bit, resting. He was more than a little bit tired, but the worst was still to come. Suddenly, the sound of trumpets rolled across the ancient forest, and the pleasant voice of the Dreamscape announced,
Only 500 challengers remain. Bravest warriors are Dar of the Maharana clan, 78 kills, Fireshing, 33 kills, Mongrel, 27 kills.
Sunny stared at the sky, the black mask hiding a grim expression on his face.
78 kills, gee, who is this monster?
He had a hunch that he already knew. Defeating his own 27 opponents had not been exactly time-consuming, but looking for them was. Who wouldn't need to waste precious minutes prowling the woods in search of enemies to kill, though? A damned archer with a strange ability to sense his targets across vast distances, and through any obstacle perhaps.
I need to step up my game, I guess.
It wouldn't do for Lord Mongrel to lag behind some legacy prince. As though to answer his thoughts, a dozen figures suddenly appeared from behind the trees, surrounding him. These awakened were armed with all kinds of weapons, looking at him with satisfied expressions. It seemed that they had planned this ambush really well. Sunny had nowhere to retreat and no chance to escape, and since the midway results had been announced just a few seconds ago, it was obvious that there was at least one person with some sort of clairvoyant ability among them. Otherwise, no one was supposed to be able to pinpoint his location this early into the battle. What else did this bastard know? Sunny sighed. One of the ambushers took a step forward and smiled.
Sorry, Mongrel. All of us here really respect you, especially after you risked your life to hold that gate. But those Valor weapons are just too sweet, and we need to think about ourselves. No hard feelings, right?
The menacing figure in black armor stared at the young man for a few moments, and then an elusive, but strangely familiar voice resounded from beneath the fearsome mask.
None whatsoever.
Inwardly, though, Sunny was not at all calm.
Bastards, lowlifes, scoundrels, 12 against 1. Where is your shame, thugs? Come here then, you damned cowards. I'm gonna kill you and then your grandmas.
Just a moment later, the ambushers obliged. All kinds of aspect abilities activated at once, turning the small clearing into a furious storm of deadly elements and steel. Inwardly, Sunny let out a panicked curse. A voice from the broadcast exclaimed that Mongrel was in trouble. Sickless glanced at the sea of outraged comments, and then back to the broadcast. Both he and Dimmy were glued to the screen, even forgetting to do their job and fill the silence with informative or entertaining chatter. The scene in front of them was just too terrifying. Just a moment ago, they saw a lone figure in black armor standing motionlessly in the center of a bright clearing, staring at the 12 ambushers surrounding him with cold indifference. Mongrel's voice sounded from the speakers, strangely dark and ethereal. None whatsoever. And then everything exploded in a brutal symphony of violence. The ambushers attacked without wasting even a second, their assault deadly and well-coordinated. Sickless held his breath. Sickless urged Mongrel to use his spatial aspect. From what he could see, this was the only chance the demonic swordsman had to escape. However, as a fan himself, Sickless knew that Mongrel never used his aspect in the Dreamscape, as though it was somehow beneath him. Mongrel only ever relied on his sword. His skill and unadulterated technique, such dignity. And this time, too, the mysterious warrior refused to compromise his unassailable noble principles. Instead of activating his ability, he simply lunged at the enemies without fear or doubt. Then something strange happened. His infamous Odachi suddenly turned into a stream of impenetrably dark liquid metal and flowed onto his arm, soon turning into a round shield. With that shield, Mongrel deflected an incoming javelin, then twisted his body, dodging a hail of razor-sharp wind blades, and dove into an immolating stream of fire that one of the awakened breathed out of her mouth. Miraculously, he emerged on the other side unscathed, like an infernal monster that could not be burned even in the flames of hell. The black armor reflected the crimson flames, somehow becoming even more menacing. In the next second, Mongrel's spiked gauntlet connected with the face of one of the ambushers. It was as though the poor man was hit by a mountain. His skull caved and then exploded, a lifeless body folding as it flew to the side and turned into a rain of sparks. What happened next could only be described as pure carnage. The black figure pounced on the ambushers, using both his gauntleted fist and his round shield to sow devastation among their ranks. Mongrel moved with terrifying speed and devious cunning, using the bodies of his enemies to block or prevent attacks from their comrades. Sickles wasn't sure, but he thought that he saw a couple of them die from friendly fire. The rest fell to the demonic butcher himself, though. Every move Mongrel made was precise, calculated, and deadly, but also brutal and utterly cruel. He danced among his enemies like a grim reaper, killing them one after another without showing any sign of even knowing what mercy or hesitation were. Blood, screams, and flashes of light filled the clearing for a good couple of minutes. And when it was all over, the lone black figure was left standing alone amidst the bodies, covered in blood from head to toe. A moment later, that blood turned into sparks of light too, and awash in light, Mongrel stepped forward, his armor as black and pristine as ever. Sickles remained silent for a few moments, and then said hoarsely. Sickles asked Dimmy hoarsely whether Mongrel had just slaughtered 12 awakened solo. The older man cleared his throat. Dimmy remarked that he might rethink his bet, and that his money was on that man. His colleague blinked a couple of times. After that, he glanced at the comments and forced out a smile. Sickles wondered aloud whether Mongrel was even a man. Meanwhile, Sonny was on the verge of collapsing onto the ground.
Everything hurts. What the hell? Why is this stupid battle royale so intense? I almost sullied my pants.
That battle, hell, it was too close. He barely managed to survive, and had only prevailed because the 12 awakened were clearly not a real cohort. They were experienced enough to coordinate their physical attacks, but when varied and unique aspect abilities had come into play, all their cohesion turned into pure havoc. He had used that confusion to quickly get rid of the most dangerous opponents, and then somehow cleaned up the rest. The mantle of the underworld still took several solid hits. The armor itself held, but his body beneath was bruised and battered.
Are these damn rewards even worth it? Damn, they'd better be.
Suppressing a pained groan, he willed the soul serpent to turn back into an odachi, and headed away from the clearing.
Just 488 left. This is going to be a long day.
Chapter 535, No Hard Feelings. A triumphant sound of trumpets resounded above the ancient forest.
Only 3 challengers remain. These brave heroes are Mongrel 111 kills, Fireshing 87 kills, Kim Sato 59 kills. Dream of glory awaits heroes.
Sonny dragged his tired body out of the forest, feeling the ground under his feet shift and tremble. At this point, the Titan was almost fully awake, and no part of the arena was safe. With the exception of the narrow strip of sand between the dark woods and the lake that he had just reached, of course. Sonny walked into the shallow water and stopped, using the soul serpent to support himself. His breath was ragged and hoarse, and there were several dents on the onyx surface of the mantle of the underworld. Almost at the same time, 2 more figures emerged from the darkness of the hungry forest. One was an attractive young woman with broad shoulders and an athletic build. Her long auburn hair gathered in a ponytail. She was wearing a modest red tunic, her torso protected by a leather cuirass, and wielded a light spear. Her blue eyes were tired, but clear, full of intensity and focus. The other was a man in heavy armor, carrying a greatsword with its blade inscribed by a complicated weave of runes. His face was hidden behind the visor of a helmet, with only calm, cold eyes visible in the narrow slit. His steps were confident, but a little unsteady, betraying a dire level of exhaustion.
This must be Fireshing and Sato.
The mighty archer had not made it. Sonny could only guess what had happened to him, but the most likely scenario was pretty obvious. The powerful legacy must have run into an ambush similar to those Sonny himself had encountered, only with a much less happy result. Well, that was life. Dar of the Maharana clan had paid the price for daring to stand out too much without having enough power to answer for such audacity. On one hand, it was not very fair as far as tournaments went. On the other hand, when was anything ever fair? Sunny much preferred to stay in the shadows, even if this damned persona of his had somewhat failed to help him in that regard. Coincidentally, none of those who had conspired to form a group had made it this far as well. And with a good reason. The type of person who would resort to such methods did not have what it took to win this battle, to begin with. So Sunny was not going to underestimate his last two opponents. They had already proven how formidable they were. The three awakened stood apart, looking at each other warily. The clear water of the tranquil lake splashed against their shins. The magnificent castle loomed in the distance, its ancient walls bathed in the bright sunlight. The vista was beautiful and peaceful, but the air was practically crackling with tension. After a while, the man in a suit of heavy plate armor turned to the fiery young woman and said hoarsely. The man in heavy plate armor suggested they deal with that demon together and decide who wins between the two of them after that thing was eliminated. Sunny rolled his eyes.
Wow, how unexpected.
He gripped the hilt of the soul serpent, preparing himself for a tough fight. To his surprise, though, the young woman shook her head and said simply, a clear expression of disdain appearing on her freckled face. The young woman refused simply, with a clear expression of disdain on her freckled face. Sunny raised his eyebrows.
Such nobility, gods, what an idiot, what a fool.
The man called Sato laughed, and then glanced at Mongrel. Sato asked Mongrel whether they should take care of the girl first and then have a proper duel, or whether that was beneath him. Sunny gritted his teeth, but had no choice but to say,
"Oh, it is."
Sunny cursed inwardly in frustration. Sato shook his head. Sato remarked on how naive young people were these days, and asked whether the dream realm had taught Mongrel nothing. Sunny raised the Odachi and grinned.
"Oh, it taught me everything."
With that, he shifted his weight and prepared to dash forward. The time for words was over. The other two also understood that, and in the next moment, the calmness of the clear lake was instantly no more. Sunny let out a startled curse as he was thrown into the air by a devastating shockwave. Landing in a roll, he hurriedly slotted the memory of fire into the mantle and rose just in time to see a massive fireball dissipate into the air. His body felt even more damaged than it had been a moment ago. Kim Sato, however, took the brunt of the explosion. His heavy armor was mangled and torn, patches of burned skin visible through the tears, just as Fireshing lunged at him. Tongues of flame appearing on the blade of her spear, he suddenly moved with unexpected agility, thrusting his sword forward. He wasn't aiming at the girl, though. Sunny let out a sharp curse of alarm. He noticed the rows of runes ignite with a menacing purple light, and then hastily threw his body sideways. In the next moment, a phantom figure of an armored giant appeared in the air and slashed downward, cutting the air where he had just stood with the identical copy of the same greatsword.
What a powerful memory.
Since both of his enemies seemed to possess deadly means of range attack, he had no choice but to close the distance. Luckily, Sato was already entangled with Fireshing, who rained a barrage of lightning fast, but precise and deadly strikes on him. It was as though the young woman was dancing, her auburn hair and red tunic flying through the air like tongues of wild flame.
Interesting style, I should leave her for last.
The man, meanwhile, didn't try to evade the burning spear and instead turned his body swiftly, making sure that it struck the undamaged parts of his armor. Despite being mangled by the explosion, the heavy armor held, betraying the fact that it too was a memory of considerable power. It didn't matter, though. A moment later, Sunny was upon them and joined the fight. The dark Odachi united with the flaming spear and a runic greatsword to sing the Song of Steel. A few minutes later, the voice of the Dreamscape spoke again.
Challenger Kim Sato was eliminated. Challenger Fireshing was eliminated. Challenger Mongrel is victorious. Glory to the victor.
As blood turned into a flood of sparks, and the waters of the tranquil lake became clear once more, triumphant music thundered from all sides. Hidden behind the black mask, Sunny grimaced and suppressed the desire to plug his ears.
What's with this terrible noise? That was way too hard.
Unbeknownst to him, the network was already exploding with countless articles, all titled more or less the same. One article read that Lord Mongrel had easily defeated 1,000 awakened. Chapter 536, Icon of Chivalry. Sunny muttered wearily about what a chore it was, dragged himself out of the Dreamscape pod and sighed. Even though the battle royale happened inside an illusion and his body wasn't tired or bruised, the mental exhaustion was real. The qualifier round had turned out to be much more demanding than Sunny had thought. Of course, he could have used the 3 shadows to augment himself and devastate the entire arena, but that would have defeated the purpose. Sunny had managed fine with just his own strength. This way. He was also polishing his technique and enriching his comprehension of shadow dance, which was not a small matter. Putting on some clothes, he returned upstairs, sprawled on the sofa, and then looked at his communicator. Currently, hundreds of similar illusory battles were being broadcasted for people to see. Some were already close to a conclusion, some were in the thick of bloodshed, and some were only just starting. However, not every broadcast received the same amount of attention. Those arenas where renowned duelists or especially powerful newcomers were fighting pulled the most of it. Sadly, due to Mongrel's infamy, the one Sunny had just finished was among the more popular broadcasts. It was also one of the earliest to end, so clips of the most exciting moments were already circulating on the network. Sunny groaned.
Perfect and just perfect. Another damned viral clip.
His final fight against Fireshing and Sato received a lot of views, but nowhere near as many as the clip of his brutal confrontation with the 12 ambushers. The comments were exploding. One commenter cheered that their lord had taught those thugs a lesson. Another complained that 12 was not enough, and that those guys were idiots who should have gathered at least 100. Someone else marveled at the line about no hard feelings, wondering aloud how anyone could be so cool. Another commenter asked if anyone had seen his Odachi shapeshift, confirming they were not hallucinating. Someone wondered if it was just them, or if Mongrel's hair looked extra gorgeous today. He grimaced, then looked at the comments under the other video. A commenter asked why that Sato guy had even asked, wondering if he didn't know that Mongrel was an icon of chivalry. Another agreed that of course it was beneath Lord Mongrel, calling him so noble. Someone scoffed, insisting that Mongrel was not noble but a wild beast, and that he had only said teaming up was beneath him because a beast like him didn't need anyone's help to kill everyone. Another commenter complained about all the edgelords in the comments today, reminiscing about the early days when only true experts knew about Mongrel and his technique was way better back then. Sunny stared at the screen for a while, then shook his head.
What's wrong with these people? Since when was I an icon of chivalry? Wait, what does chivalry even mean?
He shook his head again, then switched to the official feed and looked up the results of his match. Sunny, of course, qualified for the tournament the moment he had won the battle royale. However, other participants also had a chance to move on to the next stage. That depended on their performance and individual score, so there was no set number of people who would be allowed to continue. As it turned out of the 1,000 awakened who had fought in his battle royale, 2 more qualified to participate in the tournament. One of them was Fireshing, the young woman whom he had faced last, and Dar of the Maharana clan, the archer who had almost skewered Sunny with his giant arrows.
The bastard squeezed through after all.
Losing interest, Sunny turned off the communicator and yawned. Tomorrow, the real tournament was going to begin. Around 1,000 fighters, those who proved their mettle in the qualifying rounds, were going to face each other in proper duels, and after several days of intense competition, one victor was going to emerge to reap the best reward.
I better rest well.
He went back into the underground dojo, climbed into the sleeping pod, and closed his eyes. Soon, the familiar sight of the sanctuary appeared in front of him. Without wasting any time, Sunny left the altar island, went to his room, crashed on the narrow cot, and almost instantly fell asleep. Who said that there was no rest for the wicked? The next morning, Rain appeared at his doorstep for the training session, punctual as ever. Luckily, the tournament was not going to start until noon, so Sunny didn't have to find an excuse to cancel their lesson. Not that he would. This was much more important than some stupid tournament. He could get powerful memories elsewhere, but every day that passed was one less day for him to increase his sister's chances of survival. So, tutoring Rain took precedence. The girl repeated the movements and katas he had shown her the last time. Her form was as horrible as he had expected, but Rain was nothing if not diligent. She was improving with every set, slowly correcting the mistakes he pointed to her and absorbing the technique into her bones. For a complete novice, she was doing rather great.
Runs in the blood, I guess.
Making sure that she couldn't see, Sunny faced away and grinned. At that exact moment, his communicator received a message. After looking at it, his mood improved even further. The message was from Eiko, informing him that the soul shards he had retrieved from the Wormvine were finally sold. Transcendent shards were infinitely more rare and precious than those of lesser ranks, not only because they stored more essence, but also because there were aspect abilities and spelltech applications that depended on the quality of the raw materials used. So, Sunny just became considerably richer. He had not dared to sell Solving's soul shard, though. There were certainly awakened out there who could determine the nature and source of a shard. If anyone learned that he was in possession of one coming from a human saint, Sunny would have to answer too many uncomfortable questions. So, he had just given it to Kai instead. Strengthening the members of his cohort was, in a sense, the same as strengthening himself, so Sunny didn't feel that aggrieved because of the loss of potential profit. It was still incredibly sad, though. After the training session was over, he made a tasty breakfast for himself and Rain. The girl was hungry as a wolf, so she destroyed the contents of her plate in record time. When she was almost done, Sunny glanced at her with an incredulous expression and asked neutrally,
Has that tournament of yours started?
Rain swallowed the last bite and smiled.
The Dream Tournament, yes, the qualifying rounds were yesterday.
He took a sip of tea, acting indifferent.
Oh really, right, I think I saw some clips on the network. Did you?
She nodded.
Yeah.
She nodded with a quiet yeah.
I hear that mongrel guy is quite good.
Rain scoffed.
Sure, I guess, but I don't like him.
Sunny almost choked on his tea.
What and why?
It took a lot of effort to keep his voice calm and conversational.
Why don't you like Mongrel? Mongrel is awesome. He defeated 12 awakened solo, you know.
The girl simply shrugged.
I don't know, he just seems pompous. And who does he think he is going around teaching people how to live? Plus, what's up with that mask? A good person wouldn't have to hide behind a mask, that's what I think.
Sunny glared at her with a bit of resentment, then forced out a smile.
Well, I don't know. The mask is a powerful memory for sure, and he probably doesn't even want to teach people anything. At least that is my impression.
Rain frowned.
Plus, he caused so many problems for Night. If he had the tiniest bit of conscience, he would have come forward and refuted those ridiculous rumors. But I bet that he doesn't.
Sunny's eye twitched.
Aha, so this is the root of all this. Just you wait, Kai. I'll repay you for this one day.
He slowly took another sip of tea and asked, hiding his outrage.
You seem to know a lot about that tournament, huh? I thought you weren't very interested in that kind of stuff.
Rain sighed.
I am not. I just thought that maybe I'll see that awakened again. The woman who saved me, but she's not participating.
Sunny wanted to say something, but before she could, the girl added,
Oh, well, of course. A true awakened like her would never waste time on something frivolous like this. She is probably busy doing something important, exploring the dream realm to help humanity, protecting people from the nightmare creatures. Stuff like that, you know.
Sunny smiled.
That is certainly a possibility. Wait, what do you mean? A true awakened wouldn't waste. Didn't you suggest that I participate in that tournament?
Rain looked at him as though he was stupid.
That's you and that's her. What kind of question is that? By the way, what time is it? Oh goodness, I have to run.
With that, she hurriedly waved Sunny goodbye and dashed to the door, leaving him completely stunned.
What the hell is that supposed to mean? That's me and that's her.
He remained motionless for a while, then slowly closed his mouth and looked at the time. As it turned out, he had to hurry too. The tournament duels were about to begin. Walking toward the elevator, Sunny was seething with anger.
That's me. Well, of course that's me. I'll show her. Hell, I'll show all of them. I mean, Mongrel will. Ah, curses.
Chapter 537, Learning Curve. The opening ceremony of the tournament was supposed to be a spectacular event, with thousands of challengers, each of them a talented awakened fighter, gathered in the magnificent central courtyard of the illusory bastion. Slightly more than 1,000 of them were those participating in the individual competition, and the rest were members of competing cohorts. The representative of the great clan Valor welcomed them and gave a short speech, after which an androgynous person of undetermined age in exquisite silk garments, the eccentric saint responsible for creating the Dreamscape, followed suit. This transcendent had a hypnotically beautiful face that was, for some reason, plastered with an unreasonable amount of makeup and a genteel, almost effeminate bearing. If Sunny was there, he would recognize their pleasant voice as the one that read all the announcements in the Dreamscape. But he wasn't. Why would he waste time on these theatrics? He skipped the speeches, the performances, the incredible montage of the most exciting moments from the battles of the previous day, and even the event that everyone had been waiting for with bated breath, the formation of the tournament bracket that would determine who would face whom and in what order. Sunny didn't care who was going to fight him. He just wanted to kill somebody as soon as possible. With each round of duels, half of the participants were going to be eliminated. That meant that he had to win 10 consecutive fights to receive the best reward. Of course, it wasn't an easy task. By now, there were no amateurs remaining in the tournament. Every single one of the 1,000 challengers was a formidable warrior, and by the end of it, only true talents would remain. It was also a perfect chance for him to try and learn their polished battle styles. Sunny waited until the bracket was almost complete and finally dove into the Dreamscape. The menacing black figure of Mongrel appeared among the crowd of challengers, causing a bit of a stir. Immediately, those closest to him began to whisper. Someone in the crowd exclaimed that it was him. Another whispered that the bastard was even scarier in real life, and that after seeing that scene from the montage, they were so glad they had chosen to enter the tournament as a cohort. Someone spat and dismissed the big deal, hoping to draw Mongrel as an opponent and saying that crushing the wannabe should be fun. Ignoring the whispers, Sunny looked around with curiosity. He wasn't interested in the people gathered around him, but in the courtyard itself. This was his first time inside Bastion. Well, an illusory version of it. Still, he couldn't help but feel a bit of awe. This was a legendary place. One of the earliest citadels conquered by humans, their greatest foothold in the dream realm. The seat of a great clan's power, and the former stronghold of one of the demons. It was like he was part of history. Sunny's curiosity didn't last long, however, quickly drowned by anger and annoyance.
That girl's, what does she even know?
His hands were itching to slaughter someone. Finally, the bracket was complete. Sunny didn't bother to study it and just prepared himself for the battle. A few seconds later, his vision darkened for a moment, and then he found himself in the courtyard again, only this time. The crowd of challengers was gone, leaving only him and his opponent standing opposite each other. There were flags streaming in the air and thousands of excited spectators looking down from the stands. They were chanting, screaming and waving their hands. His opponent was a young man in a striking blood-red armor, wielding a long espadon. He looked vaguely familiar. As soon as the young man saw the black mask, his face paled. The young man groaned that he knew this would happen and cursed, not wanting to face Mongrel again. Sunny growled and dashed forward, raising the soul serpent. A few moments later, a human head flew into the air. The audience exploded with cheers, and the pleasant voice announced,
Challenger Paradise in red was eliminated.
Sickles was in the middle of a light-hearted discussion with Dimmy when the producer of the broadcast addressed him through the earpiece, forcing the young man to blink a couple of times and mask his surprise with a smile. Sickles apologized to Dimmy for the interruption, remarking that they already had a win and that it was fast. The feed changed to a replay of a swift and brutal duel that ended before the voice of the Dreamscape could even introduce the fighters. That was a first in his memory. Sickles laughed and said that of course it was Mongrel, asking who else it could be. His colleague laughed. Dimmy remarked on the bad luck for Mongrel's opponent, hoping that he was not disheartened, and saying there was no shame in losing to such a fearsome enemy. He added that everyone who made it through the qualifying rounds already deserved their respect, and that back in his day, getting into the tournament was much easier. Sickles agreed, glanced at the figure in black armor standing motionlessly above the corpse of his opponent, and couldn't help but shiver. Was it just him, or did Mongrel look especially ferocious today? Sickles wondered aloud whether Mongrel really was a nightmare creature. After that first unexpected win, several other heated duels were shown. Sickles and Dimmy switched from commentating on them to commercial breaks, to sometimes joining the other commentators to spectate the most exciting cohort battles. After a while, it was Mongrel's turn to fight again. This time, the producers switched the feed to his duel beforehand, expecting another fast and brutal kill. However, they were left disappointed. In that duel, and during a couple of next ones as well, the enigmatic swordsman seemed to lose all his edge and engaged in protracted, slow, exhausting battles with his opponents, only managing to dispatch them after long and arduous fights. Sickles, who was somewhat of a Mongrel fan but not a diehard follower, was a bit confused by the sudden change. Luckily, he had an expert partner. Sickles asked Dimmy why it seemed that Mongrel was struggling all of a sudden, saying that after his performance yesterday, he was sure they would see pure carnage again. The older man chuckled. Dimmy remarked that Sickles hadn't done his homework, explaining that this was what Mongrel did and what made him so dangerous. He said it might seem as though Mongrel was struggling, but in fact, he was not. He was learning. Sickles glanced at the chat, then laughed. Sickles joked that he was sure Dimmy didn't mean learning to suck, and asked what exactly he had meant. The resident expert smiled. Dimmy explained that Mongrel was known as a genius fighter not because he was strong and skilled, since there were plenty of such people among the duelists, but because he had an uncanny ability to absorb and mirror his opponent's battle style. He said that what the audience was seeing was not Mongrel losing, but him trying to comprehend the enemy's technique through being on the receiving end of it. He called it truly remarkable and a bit terrifying. Sickles stared at the feed and finally noticed that, indeed, Mongrel's style seemed to change with every duel, closely resembling that of his opponent's. His strange weapon also shifted and changed to mirror theirs. Sickles thought it was so cool. He turned to the camera with a wide, delighted smile. Sickles told the audience that there they had it. And not to dismiss Mongrel yet, because who knew, maybe he would shock them all yet. Soon it was time for Sunny's last duel of the day. Once again, he appeared in the courtyard and glanced at his opponent, excited to learn what style they were going to use. When he saw the enemy, though, a dark smile appeared on his face.
What a nice surprise, so we meet again, or rather, for the first time. Yesterday, we didn't have a chance to get properly acquainted, you bastard.
Opposite him stood a tall young man with broad shoulders and an incredibly muscular physique. He looked mighty and confident, like a statue of an ancient deity come to life. It was the damned archer who had almost sniped him from across the arena during the battle royale.
Dar of the Maharana clan, was it? Well, let me introduce myself.
Chapter 538, Devouring Styles. This was the fifth and final duel that Sunny had to fight today. His previous 3 opponents all practiced unique and interesting styles, so he had taken his sweet time trying to learn from them. He succeeded twice and failed once. The first opponent was called Straw Hat and used a curved sword, his technique relying on extreme speed and flexibility. Even Sunny, who had himself trained to make his body as malleable as possible, struggled to keep up with this unpredictable opponent. The alias of the second one, the other fool, was a bit familiar, but the style he used was not. Sunny spent a lot of time trying to understand the strange pattern of essence expenditure the fighter used, all the while dodging unpredictable attacks of his exquisite halberd. In the end, he learned a lot from this fight. However, it was the third opponent that had really tested him. This Awakened, whose alias was Blue Vash, wielded a slender rapier and practiced a deceptively simple battle style. What separated him from the rest was that each of his movements was utterly perfect, and every one of Sunny's mistakes had been instantly punished. It was as though the man had a supernatural ability to see even the tiniest flaw in his enemy's technique and was able to immediately exploit it. No matter how hard Sunny had tried to comprehend the essence of the style Blue Vash was using, he couldn't grasp it. In the end, he was forced to overwhelm and kill the astute fencer just to survive. However, despite that failure, he learned from this fight even more. Regardless, after several duels against such talented fighters, Sunny felt that his mastery of shadow dance, which had stayed stagnant for a while, was finally progressing again. He was slowly approaching a precipice. That was why he was so glad to see Dar of the Maharana clan. To some, facing a legacy might have seemed like a tough break. But for Sunny, legacies were like gift boxes. They hid all kinds of goodies his for the taking. The problem was that, just like the covetous coffer, this box in particular could potentially bite off his greedy hand. The young legacy fighter wasn't using a bow anymore, of course, which wasn't a surprise. Legacies were trained to be proficient with a multitude of weapons, and a duel was not a place for arrows. Instead, he was holding a menacing great mace, its round head brimming with sharp spikes. What made this guy so dangerous was not his bow in any case. It was his strange ability to zero in on the enemy and somehow perceive their every move, or whatever it was that had allowed him to barrage Sunny with arrows from afar with frighteningly high precision. While Sunny was staring at the mighty Dar, he was looking back at Mongrel. The Scion's gaze traveled across the mantle of the underworld, making Sunny shiver for some reason, and then reached Weaver's mask. Suddenly, the muscular young man frowned.
A strange and ascended armor and an echo for a weapon, even if it is just dormant. You've done well for yourself, but that mask, where did you get it?
The corner of Sunny's mouth twitched. Chatty enemies, they were the worst, especially ones with such keen vision.
Took it off a random corpse.
He paused, and then added with calm indifference.
Shall we start, or do you need time to run to the other side of the arena, hide, and summon your bow?
Sunny was trying to antagonize the young man on purpose, hoping that he would forget this line of questioning. Luckily, his strategy worked. Dar of the Maharana clan grinned.
No, Knight, who knows? Maybe I'll take it off your corpse one day, too.
With that, he raised his heavy weapon and suddenly lunged forward with a speed that no one his size was supposed to possess. The spiked mace whistled through the air, and in the next moment, the sound of clashing steel rang across the arena. Sunny grunted at how strong the impact was. He was thrown back by the force of the impact. His block held, and the soul serpent held too. However, he failed to adjust the weight of the mantle of the underworld enough, so his body was pushed back.
How the hell is he so strong? I have 3 soul cores, damn it.
Dar didn't care. He was much taller, had much more muscle mass, a much longer reach. Not to mention that as a legacy, he could have had many charms and memory enchantments feeding him strength, agility, and resilience. This fight wasn't going to be easy. Before Sonny could even properly land, the mace was flying at his head again. He pivoted on one leg, dodged the spikes, and dashed forward, hoping to close distance and get up close to the opponent. Where his small stature and the shorter weapon would give him an advantage, the soul serpent lashed out, aimed at the enemy's heart. Dar was wearing a light leather cuirass that left his shoulders and arms exposed, so Sonny hoped to pierce it with one blow. However, to his surprise, the tip of the Odachi slid off the light leather armor as though it was forged from adamantine steel instead.
Damn legacies.
The legacy in question spun his mace, forcing Sonny to retreat, then glanced down at the spot where a tiny scratch was left on his cuirass. When he looked up again, his eyes were full of dark amusement.
Not bad.
Sonny gritted his teeth.
Still running his mouth. Let's see if you have any breath to waste in a couple of minutes.
The two of them clashed again, exchanging dozens of blows. Both were strong, fast, and skilled. Neither could easily overwhelm the opponent. This was the second time Sonny had to fight a legacy, third if he counted Nephi's. The difference was incredibly obvious. His previous opponents were talented and experienced, but none of them could compare to Dar. This young man was a deadly battle machine crafted to reign on any battlefield. Trained from the moment he had taken his first step to wield weapons of war and destroy his enemies. He was no match for Castor, however, but Castor had never gotten the chance to become an awakened. Once a legacy learned to control the flow of soul essence, their power grew exponentially, which was what Sonny was currently experiencing, raw power shaped into a deadly weapon by long years of relentless practice and superb skill. And yet, he wasn't worried. Dar was powerful, skilled, and experienced, but he lacked something that people like Sonny had: the memory of fear and bitter defeats, knowledge of death, and a vicious will to persevere. Sonny didn't doubt that the legacy had spent a lot of time in the dream realm battling nightmare creatures, but he did doubt that Dar had ever found himself in absolute despair, having to claw his way back to life. His experience was that of fighting down and not fighting up. As Master Jet would say, he wasn't a killer. But Sonny was, and so the legacy had already lost this fight, even if he didn't know it yet. He was only alive because his enemy was interested in learning sophisticated battle styles, and there was a lot of sophistication in Dar's aggressive and domineering battle style. Legacies were truly in a league of their own. This was not something that Sonny could learn in a heartbeat. He needed time. And so, their violent duel had turned into a slow but terrifyingly intense battle of attrition. A minute passed, then another, then another. The two fighters were still entangled in a ferocious melee. The spectators were at the edge of their seats, holding their breath as they watched the incredible spectacle. The direct feed of the duel was gathering more and more viewers.
Bastard, how are you doing this? How?
Sonny was trying to peer into the core of Dar's style, but failed to understand its essence over and over again, until he didn't.
I see, so this is how it was so obvious.
That point, both of them were exhausted and wounded, their reserves of essence running dry. Sonny had much more left, of course. Even though continuously enhancing his physical prowess and using the feather of truth enchantment of the mantle was hungrily eating through shadow essence, he had 3 times the capacity. He also had much better control of it, it seemed. All the time Sonny had spent meditating in the sky below was not for nothing after all, feeling the foundation of shadow dance grow stronger. Sonny grinned behind the mask and suddenly changed his entire attitude. His movements turned sharper and more aggressive, his demeanor bold and overbearing. The soul serpent turned into liquid darkness, and then shaped itself into a spiked mace. Dar was thrown off by the sudden change, but only for a moment. However, that moment was all Sonny needed, dodging the enemy's attack before it could even fully manifest, as though reading the legacy's thoughts. He dove under the strike and delivered a crushing blow of his own. His enemy's leather armor still held, but the bones beneath it did not. Dar's ribcage caved, and he spat a stream of blood, In the next second, another hit connected with his jaw, turning the young man's face into a bloody mess. He fell to his knees and raised a hand, desperately trying to block the finishing blow. The demon in black armor knew no mercy, though. Calmly raising the mace, he brutally brought it down. The crowd let out a collective scream. In the silence that followed, a pleasant voice announced,
Dar of the Maharana clan was eliminated.
Chapter 539, Out of Reach. Sunny climbed out of the pod and stretched, lamenting the fact that Dreamscape capsules weren't as sophisticated as the sleeping pods used to enter the actual dream realm. Due to his luxurious metal sarcophagus, he had almost forgotten the rusty feeling of spending too much time inside one of these things. Despite the fact that the duels themselves had not lasted too long, an entire day already passed. Sunny was somewhat tired, but instead of resting, he commanded the soul serpent to shape itself into a weapon and walked to the middle of the dojo. He was impatient to cement the knowledge of the battle styles he had absorbed today. Sunny started to perform various katas, executing each one slowly at first, and then quicker and quicker and quicker still. Soon, he moved with incredible speed, his lithe and flexible body almost leaving afterimages behind. Lean muscles were rolling under his pale skin, which soon glistened with sweat. Sunny fluidly shifted from one style to another, his movements simultaneously firm and flowing, sharp and gentle, clear and unpredictable. The soul serpent flowed from one form to another, too as insidious and shapeless as the person who wielded it. It was as though Sunny was performing a strange, graceful, viciously complicated dance. His three shadows danced with him, moving swiftly on the ceramic plates of the armored floor. If Sunny could look at himself right now, he would be surprised to see that his movements were eerily similar to the dance that the young slave girl had once performed in his dream. But while her movements were beautiful and smooth, his were deadly and sharp. Hers were flawless, while his were slightly crude, as though he had not mastered his art yet.
I can feel it, the second step, I can feel it, but why can't I reach it? Something is missing.
After a long time, Sunny tiredly fell on the cold ceramic floor and remained motionless for several minutes, his chest moving heavily. There was a tired but determined expression on his face.
More, I need more and betters.
The morning, Sunny had some free time before he had to enter the Dreamscape again. Making himself a cup of tea, he relaxed in a comfortable chair and took out his communicator. After yesterday, the number of duelists remaining in the tournament had drastically reduced. Now there were only 32 of them left. Each one was a formidable opponent, so Sunny decided to study their previous fights a bit. Luckily, all the recordings were readily available on the network. His were too. A commenter declared that they were now even more sure that Mongrel was a legacy, or an actual demon, asking who else could have defeated that monster Dar. Another gushed that Mongrel had known that guy was an archer, and had even offered to give him time to get away, calling him so cordial and noble and an inspiration. Someone else asked whether they meant an actual demoness. Sunny shivered, and not even trying to look at the comments, hurriedly scrolled past these videos to start doing his research.
Maybe one of these guys will help me advance to the next level of shadow dance.
Out of curiosity, he also glanced at the cohort competition leaderboard. The team that was currently in the first place was called Librarians and, weirdly, consisted of only 2 people. Their aliases were Unorganized Laundry and Izza, which didn't tell him anything. But considering that these 2 were currently dominating much larger cohorts, they must have been a truly fearsome duo. Initially, Sunny had only joined the Dream Tournament to reap the alluring rewards, so he had not thought much of it. But now, he was starting to suspect that it was going to be a humbling experience. He had already faced several troublesome opponents that earned his reluctant acknowledgement, and things would only get exponentially harder from here. Due to his recent progress, Sunny had allowed himself to become a little vain. He was stronger and more experienced than most of the awakened he met, so he had almost forgotten to always expect the worst. Seeing these powerful awakened helped him remember how dangerous it was to underestimate the enemy. And these weren't even the true elites. Real powerhouses of the awakened world would never reveal their might in a public tournament. Sunny was one of these hidden tigers himself, after all, so he would know. With a dark expression, he shook his head and concentrated on the screen of the communicator. Very soon, he was back in the arena. Sunny had skipped all the theatrics again and only entered the dreamscape at the last minute, hoping to avoid any situation that could lead to him being asked questions. Sadly, he couldn't avoid his opponents, and if they wanted to talk, he had to answer. Currently, he was facing a man wearing a peculiar armor made out of rusted metal, their face grim and full of dark apprehension. He was in his early 30s and looked like someone who had led a rough life.
Challenger Mongrel has joined the fight. Challenger what? No, wait, has joined the fight.
Hidden behind the mask, Sunny raised his eyebrows.
What's up with that alias? Wait, why does it sound familiar?
While he was trying to remember where he had heard this bizarre name, the man summoned a shield and an arming sword, glanced at him darkly, and asked. The man asked if Sunny was the new guy everyone was talking about. Sunny sighed, knowing what would follow.
I know.
His opponent frowned. The man demanded to know why Sunny was lying. Sunny rolled his eyes, exasperated by all the talk. However, he didn't want to attack the older man recklessly. His opponent had to be quite powerful to get this far.
I am not lying.
The man sneered. The man snapped that that was exactly what a liar would say, and asked if Sunny thought he was an idiot.
Gods, can you just attack already?
He took a step forward and said,
Oh yes.
The older man stared at him for a few moments, his face full of anger and confusion. After a while, he hissed. The older man hissed that Sunny must be courting death. Chapter 540, Blood Feud. The peculiar man had an excellent technique, but it seemed as though anger was clouding his judgment. Sunny spent several minutes dodging and blocking his attacks, carefully observing both the enemy and the enemy's shadow. It wasn't long before he was able to grasp the essence of the enemy's style.
There, I understand now.
After more than 900 duels in the Dreamscape, his ability to comprehend different battle styles had considerably improved, and this guy wasn't using anything he had never seen before. His technique was polished, but unoriginal. Not that there was anything wrong with that, except that it was also too straightforward and inflexible.
How did he even get so far?
Since there was nothing else for Sunny to learn, he switched from defense to attack and delivered a swift strike, leaving a shallow wound on the opponent's shoulder. A few drops of blood landed on the mantle of the underworld, and in the next moment, Sunny learned just how the man was able to climb so high on the tournament ladder. Suddenly, the blood shone with menacing crimson light and exploded, throwing Sunny back and tearing the soul serpent from his hand. At the same time, his enemy's wound ignited with dim red radiance, and in the next second, his movements became much faster, his blow carrying much more weight. Sunny let out a sharp curse of alarm. He barely dodged a devastating downward slash, rolled away, and grabbed the hilt of the odachi just in time to block another strike and be thrown back a few steps again.
How is he suddenly so strong?
He struggled desperately to keep up with the man in rusted armor, who had somehow instantly become utterly overbearing. In the process, another drop of blood landed on him.
Crap.
The mantle withstood another explosion. Its surface did not crack, but Sunny could tell that the armor was weakened. Jumping back to his feet, he gritted his teeth and continued to fight. Pretty soon, his suspicion was confirmed. The enemy seemed to possess an aspect related to blood. His first ability allowed him to ignite it, and the second increased his strength and speed the more he bled. So every time Sunny managed to perform a successful attack, the man grew much more formidable. While Sunny himself had to either dodge the drops of blood or somehow survive another explosion. But he wasn't worried. By now, Sunny had realized that there were 4 types of challengers who tended to do well in this tournament. The first type relied on skill, the second type relied on a powerful aspect, and the third type relied on excellent memories. While the latter two were tricky to deal with, only the first type was really dangerous. The fourth type, of course, was the most deadly. These were fighters who had both formidable skill and powerful aspects, as well as an arsenal of fearsome memories at their disposal. Luckily, there weren't many such people around. This guy was obviously an opponent of the second type, and relied too much on his bizarre aspect. To defeat him, Sonny just had to think of a counter, and in this case, the counter was pretty obvious. Since every wound made his enemy stronger, he just had to finish the bastard off in one strike. And since the warrior in rusted armor neglected to truly develop his technique, that was not that hard to do. After another explosion, Sonny increased the weight of the mantle of the underworld and withstood the shockwave, then made it as light as a feather and dashed forward. He understood the essence of the enemy's style already, so it wasn't hard to predict his next move. In fact, Sonny had manipulated the man into doing exactly what he wanted. Once his opponent raised his sword to block a vicious slash, Sonny shifted his weight and suddenly changed the direction of the attack, sidestepping as he pushed his sword forward. The soul serpent scraped against the enemy's sword and slid effortlessly into the visor slit of the rusted helmet. Immediately, Sonny dismissed the shadow and jumped as far back as he could. He was just in time. The body of the man in rusted armor shuddered, and then violently exploded, causing the whole courtyard to tremble. If Sonny was just a tiny bit slower, he would have been pulverized by the explosion too, and his enemy would have avenged himself from beyond the grave. Well, from beyond being eliminated from the tournament in this case.
What kind of an aspect is that? Phew, I guess this is why Awakened are so dangerous. You just never know what kind of weird crap they are capable of.
As the crowd exploded with applause, the voice of the Dreamscape announced,
Challenger what? No, wait, was eliminated.
Sonny, however, didn't pay it any attention, because almost at the same time, the spell whispered into his ear.
You have received a memory.
A few moments later, Sonny was back in the black void, staring at the fake pattern of radiant strings with a perplexed expression.
Oh, that's crazy.
He knew, of course, that it was possible to exchange memories in the Dreamscape. This illusion was a mystical space created by a saint's aspect ability, after all, and not an artificial VR simulation. What he had not known, however, was that one could just receive a memory out of nowhere, without the usual requirement of being in physical contact, even if that contact was illusory with its master. However, if the saint in question was responsible for delivering the rewards, then it sort of made sense. More importantly, though, he had received a memory. His eyes gleamed. Sonny was already eligible for several smaller prizes, most of them in the form of credits or soul shards. He wasn't going to bother receiving them, though, even if there was a way to do so without leaving a paper trail, Sonny didn't know of one. The memories, however, that was an entirely different situation. Summoning the runes, he quickly read,
Memory of ice.
Wait, that sounds familiar. Don't I have a memory of fire charm already?
Indeed, the memory he received was eerily similar. It was another protective charm.
Memory rank ascended, memory tier ice, memory type charm, memory description. Even when the sun returned, they shivered and remembered the never-ending winter. Memory enchantments, bitter cold. Enchantment description, this charm provides the wearer with moderate resistance to cold.
A wide smile appeared on his face, hidden behind the black mask.
Now that is what I am talking about.
Sickles exclaimed an incredible win by Mongrel, barely containing his enthusiasm as he looked at the cloud of blood rising above the arena. Today, there were no simultaneous duels, as there were only 32 contenders left. Each battle was intense and exciting, and received the full attention of the commentators. Looking at the cheering audience, Dimmy laughed. Dimmy agreed that Mongrel had done very well against No Wait, adding that the man's aspect was a real menace, and that he had been on the receiving end of those explosions way too many times. Dimmy had been one of the first renowned duelists of the Dreamscape, back when it had been just growing popular 10 or so years ago, so he was talking from experience. Sickles glanced at the chat, knowing that it was a good time to involve the viewers in the discussion. Coincidentally, he noticed a comment concerning something that he himself was curious about. Sickles remarked that Mongrel had behaved a bit out of character today, practically calling a respected Dreamscape veteran an idiot, which was strange for someone usually so noble, dignified, and chivalrous. Dimmy thought for a bit, then shook his head. Dimmy explained that he had respected Mongrel before, but now truly admired him, saying it took a very talented fighter to quickly recognize a battle style, and that Mongrel was talented, but also wise. He smiled. Dimmy added that it took a very wise man to quickly recognize an idiot, and that this guy was a complete buffoon, claiming he had the misfortune of knowing him pretty well. He pointed out that only an idiot would end up with an alias like, what? No, wait. Right. Instantly, a deluge of comments flooded the chat, agreeing that Mongrel was wise, deadly, and handsome, debating whether anyone could even know what he looked like behind that creepy mask, wondering whether Mongrel was a he or a she, demanding someone ban a troll, and spitting that only a complete idiot would end up with that alias and try to fight someone as wise as Lord Mongrel. Sunny exclaimed that he remembered where he had seen that weird alias. He was preparing for his next duel when he suddenly remembered how he had entered the Dreamscape for the first time. Back then, he had almost ended up with that exact name after accidentally saying the words out loud. Luckily, it had already been taken. Otherwise, Sunny could have been called what? No, wait. Himself. He muttered that that was the guy and expressed a flicker of sympathy for the poor fellow. Not that being called Mongrel was much better. Slightly amused, he sat down and circulated his essence through the coils of the soul serpent, aiming to replenish it completely before the next fight. He had a feeling that it wasn't going to be easy. He was right. None of his next 3 duels were easy, although for very different reasons. The second opponent he faced today was called Loaf. It was a young man with shoulder-length hair who wore a light armor wielding a round shield and a spear. His technique was impeccable, but the most dangerous thing about him was his speed. Loaf was fast, very fast, so fast, in fact, that Sunny could barely see some of his movements. The worst part was that this speed did not come from an aspect ability, but simply from skilled training and incredibly precise essence control. Unlike Castor, who could move with insane speed constantly, the young man seemed deceptively slow until he chose to attack, at which point his weapons almost teleported from one place to another. Sunny only managed to resist because his enemy skillfully masked the movements of his body, but didn't think to mask the movements of his shadow. The smart thing to do was to kill the deadly opponent as fast as possible, but Sunny was utterly fascinated by the way Loaf used his soul essence, so he lingered, trying to infer details of this technique from how the young man fought. That was why Loaf ended up being the first human to make Mongrel bleed. At some point, his spear slid between the breastplate of the mantle and one of the spalders, sinking deep into Sunny's armpit. The pain was blinding. Twisting the blade and then retreating to save himself from a retaliatory strike, Loaf glanced at the vibrant crimson liquid on his spear and smiled. Loaf remarked that Sunny was human after all. Sunny suppressed the pain, tilted his head slightly, and asked whether he was. Then he dashed forward and went all out, aiming to end the fight as soon as possible, not because he was done learning Loaf's style, but because even with blood weave, he wasn't sure that he would last long. Considering how serious his wound was, thanks to his brutal battle with Castor, Sunny already knew how to deal with fast enemies. So, in the end, neither speed nor incredible mastery of essence managed to save the young man from his blade. The deep wound disappeared as soon as Sunny returned to the black void.
Interesting, very interesting. I have ways to go as far as controlling essence goes, it seems.
The next duel could have been really, really tough, but ended up being only slightly torturous. His enemy this time was named Everane and possessed a powerful sorceress aspect centered around gravity manipulation. As soon as the fight started, it felt as though a mountain fell on his shoulders. Sunny was barely able to move, while his enemy masterfully weaved the effects of aspect abilities into an already swift and lethal combat technique, making for a truly deadly combination. Luckily, Sunny had Feather of Truth, which diminished the burden a little. More importantly, he had a rich experience dealing with the crushing. Even though Everain was able to make him sweat by manipulating gravity with admirable ingenuity, he was victorious in the end. The third duel, however, made him rethink a lot of things. This time, his enemy was a friendly-looking guy with a funny alias Dionyzer. Weirdly, he wore simple garments instead of an armor and wielded no weapons. At first, Sunny thought that this was another sorcerer. However, he couldn't have been more wrong. As soon as the voice of the Dreamscape announced the start of the duel, his opponent changed. His muscles suddenly ballooned and shifted, ripping through the simple clothes. His skin glistened, becoming covered by metallic scales. His nails grew into terrifying talons, and his teeth turned into long, sharp fangs. In just a few moments, what faced Sunny was not a human, but a frightening hybrid creature that resembled a predatory humanoid lizard. A split second later, the creature was already upon him in a furious whirlwind of claws and teeth. However, while it looked like a nightmare creature and was as strong and fearsome as one, the hybrid fought with a measured technique of an experienced, cunning, battle-hardened brawler. The effect was nothing short of terrifying. The ability humans received after conquering the third nightmare and becoming transcendent was called a transformation ability, but not all transformation-type abilities were meant only for saints. While extremely rare, some aspects manifested similar powers at earlier stages. Song-sation possessed an aspect like that as well. However, while Sunny knew that such awakened existed, this was his first time facing one in battle. And what a battle it was! It was really worthy of being the penultimate spectacle of the whole tournament. It was also the first fight where Sunny felt that he really might lose. The enemy was just too strong, ferocious, and overbearing, while also being skilled, intelligent, and subtle. Fighting him was like fighting a devil or a demon at least. In fact, while Sunny had no idea, this was what their duel was being called on the network: the Battle of Two Demons. And one of these demons was bound to fall. Under the stunned gazes of numerous spectators, both those in the Dreamscape and those watching the broadcast on the screens of their communicators, Mongrel was pushed back by the rampaging monster, his dark Odachi sliding off the steel scales without leaving even a scratch on them. Nothing he did seemed to have an effect. But then something changed. At some point, the demonic swordsman dismissed his great blade and lunged into a violent, terrifyingly brutal hand-to-hand combat with the towering creature, using his fists, legs, and even the horns of his mask to attack the enemy. His style changed, turning savage and vicious, insidiously deadly, and utterly ruthless. Those who followed Mongrel for a while and knew a fair share about combat were stunned to recognize that style. It was the same primal, devastating way of fighting the Barrow Wraiths had used during the recent Gate disaster. So Mongrel was able to learn from nightmare creatures as well. What a terrifying thought. The uncompromisingly cruel brawl lasted for a dreadfully long time. In the end, both fighters were bloodied and broken, their bodies battered, but their murderous wills as sharp and unshaken as ever. Mongrel's onyx armor had cracked in several places under the unrelenting assault of adamantine talons, but the hybrid scales were also shattered and torn, his movements slowing down more and more. And then, unexpectedly, it was all over. Mongrel had caught his enemy into an arm lock, and then bent, straining with all his might. A loud crack could be heard in the deathly silence that had settled over the arena a while back, and the creature's neck suddenly twisted at an unnatural angle. At first, people couldn't believe their eyes. Only when the massive body of the hybrid reptile shuddered, and then turned into a flood of white sparks, did they open their eyes wide and started screaming with shock, joy, and admiration. Swaying lightly, Sunny looked at the disappearing torrent of sparks and grinned, thinking that one more was left, and wondering with dark amusement what he would get this time. Sunny had received generous rewards for these 3 duels. Well, for 2 of them, at least. One was an ascended memory of the 2nd tier, which was an arrow. The second was an ascended shield of the 2nd tier. Both had pretty great enchantments, but he had no time to study them in detail. All he had determined was that the memories were good enough to not be fed to Saint. The third reward, though, was a bitter disappointment. It would have been rather amazing actually for anyone else. 100 soul shards, no less. In the waking world, this was a precious resource. Even lesser legacy clans would not scoff at that amount. But since Sunny couldn't claim it, he was left with nothing. Sunny muttered a bitter curse. His disappointment didn't last long, however. In the end, it didn't really matter. The real boon was the prizes those in second and first place would receive, and Sunny had already cemented his position in the final duel. The winner and the runner-up were going to receive memories from Clan Valor's personal armory, and this was something every awakened desired, because the great clan was renowned not only for its knights. It was also famous for its forgers. Members of the Valor family often received aspects tied to forging and creation. Some of them could even create memories, tailor-made for destroying nightmare creatures and conquering the dangerous expanses of the dream realm. Sunny doubted that they would put something really unique as a prize for a public tournament, but anything from their vault was going to be precious. What's more, he had already enriched his mastery of Shadow Dance a lot. The last 3 duels especially had pushed him even closer to grasping its second step. Now, he felt as though it was almost within his reach. So, participating in the tournament was a pretty good idea after all.
I should really thank Rain. No, wait, she doesn't know that I am participating. Also, I am not participating in the tournament. Mongrel is, damn, why is everything so convoluted? I should really rest for a bit.
After the battle with Dionyser, he wasn't in the best shape. That fight was nothing short of brutal. Even Sunny, who usually thrived in brutality, was a bit stunned by how violent it ended up being. His wounds had disappeared as soon as the duel ended, but mental exhaustion remained. His essence was also really spent, since that was how the Dreamscape functioned. Luckily, the organizers of the tournament were smart enough to not schedule the final fight anytime soon. First, there would be the duel for the 3rd and 4th place, as well as some entertainment. He had hours to rest and recuperate. With a tired sigh, Sunny left the Dreamscape, climbed out of the pod, and went to make himself a tasty dinner. While eating, Sunny studied his opponent. This year, the final duel was going to be a bit unusual, because both challengers were not powerful newcomers who entered the Dreamscape to win the tournament rewards, but habitual duelists, well, if Mongrel could be considered one. He had heard about the woman he was going to face too, but not much. Her alias was Queen Bee, and she was almost as enigmatic as Sunny himself, unlike other popular duelists. She didn't broadcast or promote her fights, preferring instead to remain anonymous and under the radar. It seemed as though she was only interested in dueling itself and nothing else. From what he knew, Queen Bee had never lost a duel. She was an undefeated champion of the arenas. Why would someone that powerful hang out in an illusory game? He had no idea. But Sunny wasn't one to judge, since he was also wasting his time there despite having better things to do. He had his reasons. So maybe she did too, or maybe it was just a fun hobby. In any case, the network was full of theories about who Queen Bee might be. There was even a rumor that she was not human at all, but instead an artificial construct created to keep the players from reaching the top spot and to remind them to always strive for greater mastery. Which was complete idiocy, of course, considering that Dreamscape was not capable of emulating actual intelligence. If it was, Awakened wouldn't waste time fighting each other and train against simulated nightmare creatures instead. But people believed what they wanted to believe. And people were also insane. Sunny stared at the screen and breathed that he had no idea what the hell he was looking at. Sunny stared at the communicator with a weird expression. To no surprise whatsoever, Queen Bee had her own army of unreasonable fans, even though she didn't want any. And currently, that army was engaged in an all-out war with Mongrel's own unwanted horde of followers. The network was bursting with venom and vitriol produced by both sides. One side spat that Lord Mongrel was a loser and told his fans to come back when he was King Mongrel, calling them tasteless dimwits. The other side shot back that Mongrel had never claimed to be a lord and would not want to be a king, insisting he was one of the common people, and telling the royalists to follow a tyrannical monarch privately. The first side demanded to know who was being called sheep, pointing out that the shady mongrel guy had literal horns. Someone tried to calm things down, suggesting that Mongrel and Queen Bee were the same person and there would be no duel. That was met with outrage from Queen Bee's fans, who declared that Mongrel couldn't compare to their noble queen's left pinky. Mongrel's fans fired back that the pathetic wannabe princess couldn't compare to honorable Lord Mongrel. At least both sides could agree that the previous commenter was an idiot, though that consensus collapsed instantly into mutual accusations of idiocy. Sunny stared at the screen, his eye twitching. After a while, he turned away and muttered that humanity was a mistake and that maybe it was time to give someone else a chance, adding that he heard mushrooms were a pretty neat species. Turning off the communicator, Sunny concentrated on devouring his food, even though all that nonsense had almost killed his appetite. Sunny's appetite, however, was as resilient as he himself was, maybe even more. It was more or less impossible to kill. A few hours later, Sunny returned to the arena. It was time to end this spectacle and reap his rewards. However, first, he had to defeat the strongest opponent yet. Sunny muttered to himself that it was going to be fine and that he would get a sweet memory either way, but winning would be much better. As soon as he appeared, the crowd cheered. Hearing the thunderous cheer, Sunny almost flinched. The last duel of the tournament was different from all the rest. The courtyard had changed slightly, somehow becoming even more magnificent. The grandstands were extended, with dozens of thousands of spectators crowding the stone seats. Their cheers blended into a deafening, excited roar that rose and fell rhythmically, like the sound of a turbulent sea. Rose petals were raining from above, covering the arena in a beautiful carpet. No matter how cynical Sunny wanted to be about the whole thing, it was hard not to feel his blood boil at this scene. He turned his head slightly, taking in the sight of the chanting crowd. Then, his sight lingered for a few moments on a tall tribune that loomed above the arena, decorated with the vibrant vermilion banners of the great clan Valor. Since this was the final duel, very special people were going to spectate it in person. Sunny easily recognized the creator of the Dreamscape, who was dressed in ridiculously colorful silken robes and looked like a parrot that had taken a bath in a tub of face powder. He still couldn't believe that this gaudy clown was an actual saint. The person near him had to be the representative of Valor then. Sunny couldn't see much, and just noted that it was a young woman with dark wavy hair and alabaster skin. She wore an intricate suit of lusterless, black armor and a red cape, which was the same color as the banner of her clan. Her sharp and austere appearance was in stark contrast with the saint of Dreamscape. The tribune was too far away to see any details. But Sunny wasn't inclined to stare at a legacy from a great clan anyway. He was already uncomfortable knowing that she would be observing him fight. On the other hand, Sunny mused that he had better put up a good show, and that maybe if that girl liked it, he would receive an extra good memory. Throwing these thoughts out of his mind, Sunny finally lowered his gaze and studied his opponent. Since Sunny knew some of the best fighters of his generation, he had entertained the idea that he might have met the formidable Queen Bee outside of the Dreamscape already. But no, she didn't seem familiar. The famous duelist was seemingly in her 30s, and even though the lower half of her face was hidden behind an elegant half-mask, he was sure that he had never seen her before. She stood calmly in the center of the arena, as though not affected by the cheering crowd and the esteemed guests in the audience at all. From just one glance, Sunny knew that he was looking at a combat master. Everything about the regal woman spoke of skill, grace, and resolve. She wore a light metal armor and wielded a slender estoc, its blade long and sharp. There was a strange serenity about her that somehow seemed simultaneously alien and familiar. Sunny thought to himself that it was clarity, the same vibe Neff sometimes gave off. Indeed, it was the same type of clarity that Nephi's and Sunny himself possessed. But while Changing Star was sharp and inevitable like a striking sword, Queen Bee was not. On the contrary, she seemed deceptively placid. Sunny murmured that it was a weird contradiction. The woman studied him too, allowing Sunny to look her in the eyes. They weren't blue, gray, green, or even purple, and instead seemed to shift from one color to another as though reflecting her mood. The strangest thing about them, though, was that those weren't the eyes of a killer. Sunny knew how to recognize one. Because he was a killer himself. He suppressed the desire to scratch the back of his head and muttered that she was a combat master but not a killer, and wondered if it was really just her hobby. What kind of a hobby was that? In any case, this was going to make things a little easier for him. Sure, Queen Bee might have been a prodigal duelist. She wouldn't have got to the finale of the tournament otherwise, but without the killing instinct, defeating someone like Sunny would be nearly impossible. For him, combat was not something interesting or engaging. It was not something he did for fun or even his profession. It was simply his life. God of War was not called the God of Life for nothing. Life was a constant, brutal struggle, and Sunny knew it better than most. That was why he was such a vicious and cruel fighter, never missing out on the tiniest chance to destroy his enemy. That was not to say that the duel was going to be easy. Killer or not, Queen Bee was still a fearsome opponent. With a sigh, he summoned the black Odachi, put its blade on his shoulder, and walked forward. The trumpets sang, and the voice of the Dreamscape announced the names of the fighters, lunging into a solemn speech afterward. Sunny didn't listen to it, and simply approached the middle of the arena, then hesitated and performed a small, awkward bow toward the graceful woman. He wasn't a courteous person, but in this situation, bowing seemed somehow appropriate. Queen Bee looked at him calmly and nodded lightly. Then, she raised her estoc into position. Sunny muttered that this was going to be tricky. He sighed, gripped the hilt of the soul serpent, and lunged into a lightning-fast attack. What was the point of wasting time? Sunny was trying to overwhelm his opponent in one fell swoop, but of course he failed. The long blade of the slender estoc flew with incredible speed, preventing him from approaching Queen Bee to deliver even a single strike. For a few seconds, nothing but the ringing of steel could be heard above the arena. Even the audience grew quiet, looking at the incredible fight with bated breath. Unlike the previous duels, there was nothing flashy or particularly spectacular about this one. It wasn't as brutal as the battle between Mongrel and fearsome shapeshifter Dinosaur, nor was as strange and exciting as his fight against the gravity sorcerer Everain. There were no fascinating aspect abilities flying around, and instead, it was all about skill, steel, and technique. However, people who knew even a little bit about combat couldn't take their eyes off the intense confrontation. Every strike, every block, every step the fighters took was full of flawless precision, insight, and clear resolve. This was a battle of two masters, and thus it was much more thrilling and breathtaking than anything else they had seen in this tournament. Sunny, however, was having much less fun than the audience. In fact, he wasn't having any. Sunny demanded of himself to know what the hell was going on. Something was very, very wrong with this duel. He had noticed it almost instantly, but couldn't do anything to prevent the whole fight from going sideways. In fact, although it seemed as though he was holding his own and even advancing on the Regal Queen, Sunny was actually scrambling to save his life every second. This woman was just too weird. There was something wrong with her shadow. Not the harrowing, unnatural kind of wrong that he had felt before in the dream realm, but a very mundane kind of wrong which, nevertheless, threw him for a loop. It was as though there was a slight disconnect between how the shadow moved and how the woman casting it moved. More than that, although Sunny watched Queen Bee's movements and footwork carefully to predict her next attacks and react to them, each time, he was ending up being slightly mistaken. Even if he misplaced his sword by a centimeter, it was already enough to mess up the whole cadence of the fight and allow his enemy to bypass his defenses. Sunny demanded to know how she was doing this. He had to find the answer very soon, because every second that passed could potentially lead to his loss. Sunny tried to deflect an incoming thrust, but missed by a few millimeters once again. As the result, the swift estoc slid past the blade of the soul serpent and stung him in the chest, sending a tremor running through his entire body. The mantle of the underworld protected him, but Sunny wasn't deceived. Queen Bee was just measuring him, learning his patterns just like he was learning hers. When she achieved a sufficient level of understanding, the next attack would pierce his neck instead of ricocheting off his armor. Sunny breathed that it was like hell. Gritting his teeth, he suddenly changed his style, summoning the domineering technique of Dar of the Maharana clan and applying it to the Odachi. He was already losing to the slender Estok in speed, so turning the soul serpent into a heavy great mace was not the best choice. So, Sunny just made adjustments to the battle style on the fly. But just as he shifted to another style, Queen Bee did the same, suddenly transforming her technique into a completely new one. Sunny cursed sharply. They continued to fight, moving swiftly across the arena as their swords clashed against each other. Sunny was still at a disadvantage, which was only growing larger and larger as the seconds passed. Both fighters were proficient in various styles and could switch from one to another almost instantly, which made the duel especially thrilling. The audience was going crazy. Sunny was going crazy too, but for an entirely different reason. He urged himself to think. Facing an enemy like this was a golden opportunity to enhance his comprehension of the shadow dance. But to do that, he first had to understand what exactly Queen Bee was doing. Why was her shadow behaving so strangely? Why was he always mistaken when judging the precise placement of her attacks? At some point, Sunny almost slid on the damn rose petals that littered the arena and only barely managed to keep his balance, dodging the tip of the Estok at the last second. He snarled curses at the damned things, demanding to know whose bright idea it was to fill the arena with trash. In fact, it was a miracle that neither of the two duelists had suffered from this treacherous footing already. Sunny's eyes widened as he repeated the word miracle to himself, then paused. Wondering if a miracle was the key, dodging another lethal strike, he shifted from balanced technique to defense and glanced at Queen Bee's feet again. From start to finish, she had not been bothered by the rose petals once, and now that he paid attention to it, his eyes widened. He wondered if he was seeing things. No, he wasn't. Not only did his graceful opponent avoid losing her footing on the slippery petals, but none of them were also crushed under her armored boots. It was almost as though she was always hovering a few millimeters above the ground without actually touching it. No, not almost. That was exactly what was happening. Such a small difference was very hard to notice, but it explained why the angle of how Queen Bee's shadow hit the ground was ever so slightly wrong, and why Sunny was always misjudging her attacks a tiny bit. A few millimeters was a very minuscule amount, but in a battle as precise and calculated as theirs, it made for a huge difference. Sunny breathed a single word, hell. Was he right? There was only one way to find out. Sunny continued to fight for a few seconds, thinking carefully. He didn't correct his mistake knowing that giving away his new understanding of Queen Bee's aspect ability, if it was an ability, would be a wrong move. Instead, he had to construct a trap and end the fight with it. But trapping someone as skilled and talented as his current opponent was not easy. In fact, deceiving someone who had clarity was a very tall task. Luckily, Sunny was a skilled fighter himself. But better yet, he was an even more talented deceiver. So, he continued to pretend and prepare his ambush, all the while greedily absorbing his enemy's technique. Now that he knew the secret, he could see it much more clearly. At some point in the duel, Mongrel seemed to finally make a mistake. He once again misjudged Queen Bee's intention and threw his blade too low, allowing the Estok to slide above it and flash toward his throat. However, it never hit its mark. Instead of piercing Mongrel's neck, the slender blade simply left a deep cut on his skin, because at the last moment, the demonic swordsman moved ever so slightly to his left, and then almost instantly dashed forward. The dark Odachi hissed as it cut the air, and the figure in black armor moved past the graceful woman in light armor, stopping a couple of steps behind her. Feeling a stinging pain radiating from the shallow wound on his neck, Sunny sighed and lowered the soul serpent. Behind him, Queen Bee swayed lightly and then fell into a torrent of white sparks. For a couple of seconds, the magnificent courtyard was silent, and then it became filled with deafening cheers from the crowd. Sunny looked at the celebrating spectators, breathing heavily, and asked himself whether he had really done it, whether he had won. As though to answer his thought, the voice of the Dreamscape announced,
Challenger Queen Bee was eliminated. Glory to the victor. The champion of the annual Dream Tournament is...
However, the pleasant voice was drowned by the chanting of the crowd, roaring Mongrel's name over and over.